Chapter 569. It was not impossible for them to leave to hide from the disaster, but no one wanted to do so unless it was absolutely necessary. If they were really forced to leave, just how great would the changes in the world be? It was unimaginable. Moreover, in the past 3 years, the construction of the houses and the planting of the fields were already on track. It was a good time for rapid development, but now they had to leave. They could only say that they were unlucky. Life was full of obstacles. No matter what would happen in the future, it had not happened yet. This gave everyone a chance to prepare. They could not wait until the disaster happened. They had to plan ahead. The person in charge of the fields came over to ask Xiao Xian about the planting of the 1,000-grain gold. Last year, they did not know what the weather would be like, so they tried to plant some other seeds. The 1,000-grain gold could not be planted carelessly. It was even more precious than Jiju's seeds. That was why they did not plant any 1,000-grain gold last year. Now that the weather was back to normal, the person in charge of the fields was thinking about planting some new seed. After a discussion, Chi-Chi and the rest came over to ask Xiao Xian. After all, the decision on the 1,000-grain gold lay with Xiao Xian. No, don't be in a hurry to plant the seeds, Xiao Xian continued, seeing Chi-Chi's confusion. Not just the 1,000-grain gold, don't plant anything else for now. As for the crops in the fields, if there are any ripe ones, keep them first, especially the grains we planted last year. Some of the crops in the fields were already ripe. According to the original plan, after the harvest, they would distribute the crops according to their work. But this time, in order to prevent the disaster, they had to change the plan. Meat could not be preserved for long, but grains and other crops could be preserved for a long time. If they could not find any prey by then, there was still food in the storehouse to solve the problem. Although they did not understand Xiao Xian's reason, since Xiao Xian had said so, Chi-Chi would do as he said. But if we do that, there will be a lot of empty space in the fields, Chi-Chi said. Chi-Chi said. In the past winter, the empty fields weren't left there all the time. The people in charge of taking care of the fields had used various planting techniques to fertilize the fields and wait for the seeds to be planted. But now, Xiao Xian actually asked them to stop planting. It wasn't that they had any complaints, they just felt that it was a pity. When Xiao Xian said that he would not plant anything for the time being, he did not mean that he would not plant anything. It was just that he would temporarily stop sowing those plants that had a long growth cycle. However, he could plant some plants that had a short growth cycle. The time between planting and harvesting was relatively short. Perhaps they would have matured before the disaster struck. At the very least, they would still be able to harvest some. Chi-Chi realized something from Xiao Xian's words. He nodded and left with a serious expression. Although Xiao Xian didn't say what would happen, the shaman had told everyone during this year's ceremony that they needed to be extra careful this year. Everything was for the sake of Yanjiao. There was nothing wrong with trusting their decision. Chi-Chi went to tell the other people in charge of the fields about Xiao Xian's intentions. Other than Yanjiao, some people in other parts of the continent also had a premonition of what was going to happen. For example, the Mang tribe and the other large tribes. The shaman wasn't an idiot either. He had a premonition before, but it wasn't strong at the time. Now, perhaps because the disaster was approaching, his premonition grew stronger. Every tribe was making preparations. Far away from the fearsome beast forest, far away from the large tribes, at the border of the continent, near the boundless river. The drumming tribe's trading team had just returned from trading with the Pu tribe. On the way back, they carried bamboo baskets filled with all sorts of utensils and stood on the backs of large crocodiles. The crocodiles in the river swayed their powerful tails. Only part of their bodies was above the water surface. They looked around with cold, emotionless eyes. In the past winter, the tribes in other parts of the continent had encountered quite a bit of trouble. Some people even died of thirst. However, to the tribes living near the river, even though the heat was torturous, they could still withstand it. At least they didn't have to worry about water. The river they were in now was almost dry during the winter. At higher elevations they could see the bottom. The mud at the bottom of the river was hard from the sun, so the crocodiles all ran into the river. Because of the crocodiles' help, the drumming tribesmen didn't get attacked by the other dangerous beasts in the river when they went to get water. Under such high temperatures, not only were the people easily agitated, even the fish in the river were full of murderous intent. After winter, a few days of heavy rain caused these small rivers to rise again. However, it was only for a few days. During this period of time, the river had obviously dropped. When the crocodiles swam in the water, their mood was much worse. "Will the river dry up again?" asked a warrior from the drumming tribe. "Who knows? But even if it dries up, we still have the river next to us. There's plenty of water there. Anyway, we won't die of thirst." Another warrior standing on the back of a crocodile said indifferently. People in the inland areas were seriously short of water, but they weren't. They didn't worry about the life and death of others. They only cared about their own tribesmen. The closer they got to the drumming tribe, the more strange the warriors became. "Why do I feel like there are a lot more fish today? I saw them too. I thought they were here to welcome us, but looking at them, it's more like what?" The warrior didn't continue, only frowning. The others had the same expression. They were familiar with the crocodiles. The tribe's totem was the crocodile. They could see the emotions of the crocodiles. In the past, there weren't as many crocodiles swimming in the river as there were now. However, along the way, they found that the number of crocodiles in the river was more than 3 times more than before. Twice as many crocodiles was already abnormal. They would look for the reason. Now there were more than 3 times more crocodiles. This situation made them panic. Just as the warrior said, the crocodiles didn't look like they were here to welcome them. It was more like they were hiding from something. Even if the crocodiles didn't panic, such a situation made the drumming tribe explode. The shaman spent the night looking for the reason. His ability wasn't as strong as the shamans of other big tribes. He had a premonition that something bad was going on, but he couldn't compare to those big tribes. Therefore, he wanted to find some solutions and try to find out the specific reason for the crocodile's behavior. Day after day, the people of the drumming tribe still couldn't find the reason. However, more and more crocodiles came ashore, swam into the river, and lurked in the ponds of the drumming tribe. On the contrary, there were fewer crocodiles in the river. Without the crocodiles, there were more dangerous fish and river beasts in the river. For a time, the people of the drumming tribe didn't dare to go into the river. They only dared to go to the rivers with more crocodiles. One day, the warriors of the drumming tribe, who were patrolling on the river bank, heard a gurgling sound. They thought it was a river beast in the water and immediately became alert. However, they stared at the river for a long time and only saw some bubbles coming out of the river. There were no river beasts. The fishes with sharp teeth in the river jumped out of the water from time to time. When they fell into the water, they jumped around restlessly. Chapter 570. The changes in the boundless river made the people of the drumming tribe worried. The changes in the river lasted for a few days, but they didn't see any big movements. It was like seeing someone throw a huge stone at them, but they didn't see the stone fall. The shaman and chief of the drumming tribe couldn't sleep for several nights. Since the changes on the other side of the river, the crocodiles in the river collectively moved their nests away from the river bank. Now their range of activity was also far away from the river bank. Even if they had to climb a long distance into the water every day, they were willing to do so. This made the people of the drumming tribe even more puzzled and worried. What on earth made the crocodiles behave like this? Until one seemingly peaceful day, the ground suddenly shook. The crocodiles that were swimming in the water panicked and climbed ashore from the river. They continued to run away from the river bank towards their new cave. The man standing on the crocodile's back was overturned. No matter how he shouted, the crocodiles didn't look back and kept climbing towards their new cave. After the earthquake, there was no more movement. When the warriors of the drumming tribe checked around, they found that there were many dead fish in the river. A few days ago, the fish that were fiercely jumping on the river and biting each other with their big mouths were now floating on the water with their bellies turned up, motionless. This. What's going on? The patrolling warriors hurried back to report this to the shaman and chief. In the following days there would be an earthquake every 10 days or so. Moreover, the interval between each earthquake was getting shorter and shorter, and it was getting more and more intense. The people of the drumming tribe followed the instructions of the shaman and the chief. They learned from the crocodiles and moved all their houses away from the river bank. At that time, the water in many places on the mainland had dried up. The good thing was that the weather didn't change much. It was still the same as in previous years. However, every time it rained, the people of the tribe and the wanderers who depended on the tribes would rush to bring out the prepared pots to collect water. The tribes that were good at making pottery made a lot of money in such a strange living environment. In the past, large pottery was not easy to sell. Now, the best sellers were the terracotta jars and large pot. Making pottery was easy, but making good pottery was not easy. Many people's pottery wasn't of good quality. It was easy to break, and water would seep out of the walls of the jar. Some of them couldn't be used for long and weren't strong enough. They could only buy pottery from the trading places. It was the same in Yanjiao. The tourists would also request to use their labor in exchange for pots and jars. After the shower ended, the people inside and outside the tribe were all busy. They put the pottery that was placed outside to catch water into the house. Now, because of the special situation, if the shamaness felt that it was going to rain, she would inform the people in the tribe in advance. Then, when they saw the change in the sky, everyone would hurriedly move out the tools they used to collect water, filling up the outside. In the end, there was not much space for people to walk outside. However, when it was raining, not many people were outside. Everyone was busy fetching water. The shaking of the ground was not only felt at the edge of the mainland, but also felt in other places. Especially in the forest where Yanjiao was located, it was especially intense. Every time the ground shook, there would be chaos in the forest. Beasts would roar and birds would fly in disorder. What shocked Xiao Xian the most was that when he went out to hunt, he saw a volcano in the forest. The volcano had not erupted for a long time. There was a pool in the depression at the top of the mountain. Xiao Xian had been there with the hunting team. It seemed that the volcano hadn't erupted for thousands of years. There were many plants and animals living there. Xiao Xian didn't pay much attention to it at that time. But this time, when he went out with the hunting team, carrying the prey to the cave where they rested, Xiao Xian saw the towering mountain that was thousands of meters above the ground. It looked the same as before, but it gave Xiao Xian a strange feeling. Xiao Xian also asked the others in the hunting team. When they saw the volcano, they didn't feel anything special. Only Xiao Xian felt more and more frightened. He always felt that there was a ferocious monster hidden under the tranquility. It might not be that there was a giant beast living there. Xiao Xian just felt a wave of panic when he saw the volcano. It was his first instinct. There must be a reason for it. Then, the successive earthquakes made Xiao Xian have a guess. If that guess was true, taking a deep breath, Xiao Xian called the people who were in charge of the farmland and asked about the situation in the field. Some of the newly planted crops with short growing periods were close to maturity. They were just side dishes that the warriors didn't like. The non-totemic warriors in the tribe liked them, because they were good for their health. When the land was empty, the people who were in charge of the farmland chose to plant these seeds. The harvested grains and some food that could be stored for a long time were all processed and stored in the warehouse. Weapons were being forged all the time. Everyone had been making preparations for the uneasiness in their hearts. Just as the earthquakes happened again and again, the rainy season came. According to the situation in the past, The rainy season here was not as obvious as the rainy season on the river bank. It just rained more often. But this year, the rain was not only frequent but also fierce. Everyone no longer took out the containers to hold the water. But this still couldn't reduce the panic in their hearts. Boom! The ground shook again. Many of the pots placed there to hold the water were overturned, and some even broke. Some people almost lost their balance. All kinds of utensils clanged against each other, and many children cried in the houses. This was already a very good situation. After all, the ground shook many times, and everyone was mentally prepared. They were not as panicked as they were at the beginning. It had only been 5 days since the last earthquake. The time interval was even shorter. Splash! The rain fell more rapidly. If it was in the past, many people living near the rivers would be worried that such a fierce rainstorm would cause the river to overflow and flood their farmland. But now, no one thought about the overflow of the river, because the water level was still relatively low. The Lu tribe. The chief of the Lu tribe stood in front of the pool occupied by their tribe with a wooden face. This place had become a bottomless pit. Since the end of winter, the pool had not produced any water. Even now, when the rain was unusually frequent, there was no sign of water coming out of the pool. This rainy season was unusual. Many people had never experienced it before. The rainfall was heavy and turbulent, but the river still didn't rise. The people of the drumming tribe, who lived on the edge of the continent, felt it even more strongly. The patrolling warriors stood on the bank of the big river, looking into the distance. Those huge figures of the river beasts jumped out of the water, making a long roar. They had lived here for so long. Every year at this time, they would hear the river overlords roaring and leading the river teams away. But this was the first time they heard the river overlords not roaring like in previous years. This time, the roar was sharper and more urgent, making people more flustered. Moreover, according to the annual pattern, the various river beasts in the river would leave during the rainy season. However, the situation of the river beasts leaving this year had happened long before the rainy season had even arrived. This year's rainy season, the river beasts left very early. This year's rainy season, the crocodiles of the tribe did not leave, but they rarely appeared. The situation of going into the river was even rarer. Most of the time, they stayed far away from the river bank. This year's rainy season, the water level of the boundless river began to fall in advance. Before the rainy season ended, the fall was obvious. No matter how heavy the rain was, it couldn't save the falling river. What do you think will happen? A warrior of the drumming tribe was drenched in the rain, wiping his face and asking. After he asked, he didn't hear the response of the others in the team. When he looked to the side, the warriors were all staring at the river, as if their eyes were going to pop out. Their faces were ashen, as if they had seen something extremely terrifying. What are you looking at? Look at how scared you are. Before he finished his sentence, the warrior also saw the situation on the river. In fact, they didn't see it clearly. After all, it was far away, and there was a thick curtain of rain obstructing their vision. They could only see a blurry shadow. But it was this blurry shadow that scared the patrolling warriors so much that they almost suffocated. In the river that had fallen a lot, on the surface of the water in the distance, there was a river beast that had appeared. The river overlord that used to give people an unparalleled sense of oppression suddenly exploded. Yes, it exploded directly. It was like a piece of soft mud that was squeezed hard by someone. In the distance there was a bloody scene. The cry of the river beast stopped abruptly, and no other river beasts appeared. Everything on the river seemed to have suddenly quieted down. Perhaps there would be some sound at the point of the incident, but the river bank was far away, and there was the noise of the rain falling constantly, so the warriors of the drumming tribe couldn't hear anything else. In the distance, the river seemed to be shrouded in a bloody mist, and they couldn't see anything else. The rapid rain fell on people, fell into their eyes, and flowed through the narrow pupils of the people of the drumming tribe. They could bear the water entering their eyes, but the sudden rain fell too quickly, and it caused a little discomfort in their eyes. But at this time, that discomfort couldn't affect the mood of the warriors at all. After a little silence, the warriors of the drumming tribe reacted, and they all took a deep breath of the cold water vapor. The rain poured into the trachea from the nasal cavity, and several warriors were choked, coughing as if their lungs were going to be coughed out. In fact, the choking of the rain wasn't serious, but they had just recovered from the shock, and just wanted to do something to vent their fear. On the river, that was the overlord of the river. Everyone was extremely afraid of it, and admitted that it was the overlord of the river. However, the huge overlord of the river turned into a bloody mist in an instant. What kind of power was that? Chapter 571. Above the river, the bloody mist in the distance became thinner and thinner as the surface of the river fell. Finally, it disappeared. In the end, the people of the drumming tribe didn't know what happened on the river. After they saw what happened on the river, the whole tribe once again moved away from the river bank, further away from the river bank. Although they didn't get close to the river, the people of the drumming tribe could guess the situation on the other side from the movements of the nearby rivers. Before they moved back, the water in the big river had already started to fall. Some of the small rivers that connected to the big river had also started to change. It was similar to what happened after the end of the rainy season in previous years. However, this time all the changes were brought forward. Moreover, the water level in those small rivers was also unprecedentedly low. The rain continued, and it lasted longer than in previous years. The water level in the nearby rivers didn't rise. The crocodiles of the drumming tribe all seemed to be frightened. They always hid in their nests and didn't leave. At most, they would go into the river to fish or hunt other prey. Some of the more irritable crocodiles would even fight. The crocodiles were anxious and worried, and so were the people of the drumming tribe. It wasn't just them. On this continent, people from other places and within each tribe were all filled with a sense of panic. Especially the shamans of the few large tribes, they always felt very anxious, as if a beast that had been lurking for a long time was about to bare its fangs. However, where this beast was, what it looked like, and what kind of threat it would pose, they had no idea. Fearsome Beast Forest, Yanjiao Tribe. In the house, Old Ku's stone crafting sound had no rhythm. This wasn't Old Ku's usual style, but at this time, Old Ku was already absent-minded. His eyes weren't on the stone he was crafting. He was staring at a certain spot, but there was no focus. Xiao Xian looked at the sky, which was still raining, and didn't say a word. Suddenly, the sky seemed to change its style. A dark scene replaced the rain falling from the sky. The sky seemed to be dyed with a mass of ink, and the ink was spreading quickly. Flashing lightning cut through the darkness and scattered everywhere. Xiao Xian couldn't help but take a deep breath as a huge pressure and panic suddenly assaulted him. Even his hair stood on end. However, when Xiao Xian quivered and looked again, the sky was still the same as before. Dark clouds covered the sky and rain poured down hastily. Where did the lightning and ink come from? No, that's not right. Xiao Xian paced around the room. This feeling was too familiar. It was not every time he would get a revelation from the dream. He would also see some situations that others could not see. It happened a long time ago, but this kind of situation did not appear often. Xiao Xian's sudden impatience snapped Old Ku out of his daze. Stopping what he was doing, Old Ku walked to the door of the stoneware workshop with his cane. He looked over at Xiao Xian and asked, "What's wrong?" Xiao Xian's violently beating heart still hadn't calmed down. When he heard Old Ku's question, he didn't explain much. Instead, he said, "I'm going to the shaman." After taking 2 steps, he turned back to Old Ku and said, "You can make a hat. A hard one with a wide brim." After saying that, Xiao Xian hurriedly ran into the rain, leaving Old Ku standing there with a puzzled expression. He didn't understand why Xiao Xian wanted to make that kind of thing. The hat that Xiao Xian mentioned was made by Xiao Xian last year when they were farming. It was for the people who took care of the field to use it to hide Yang Guang. Later, everyone weaved that kind of straw hat with rattan grass and remembered the style. Naturally, old Ku was familiar with it. However, Xiao Xian just said that it had to be hard. If it was hard, they couldn't use normal rattan grass. Although he didn't understand why Xiao Xian said that, old Ku still followed Xiao Xian's instructions and thought about what material to use. On the other side, Xiao Xian hurriedly ran to the shamans. When he arrived, the two shamans were discussing something. Seeing that Xiao Xian was in such a hurry, they stopped talking and asked, "What happened?" If it was just a normal matter, Xiao Xian wouldn't be in such a hurry. Xiao Xian nodded and told the two shamans what he saw just now. Hearing this, the two shamans were shocked and the worry in their eyes grew. "What do you think that is?" The two shamans didn't know what that situation was, but Xiao Xian had a guess. He took a deep breath and tried to speak calmly and clearly. "I think that the volcano in the forest is about to erupt." "What?" The two old shamans were shocked and stood up from the animal skin cushions. The last time Xiao Xian went out with the hunting team and saw the volcano, he told the shamans about it when he came back. However, at that time, there were no signs and no one could be sure what would happen. But now, Xiao Xian felt that there was more than a 60% chance that what he said was true. The two shamans didn't know what kind of effect a volcano eruption would have, but they had learned about it from the records left behind by their ancestors. "Is it really coming?" The old shaman's voice trembled. His eyes were tightly shut, and his loose eyelids trembled. Then, he suddenly opened his eyes and called in the two soldiers who were guarding outside. His tone was resolute, and he emphasized almost every word. "Immediately inform the people above the leader to come here." Perhaps there were some old warriors who didn't want to leave, but at this time, the shaman showed his tough side again. In order for this operation to be carried out, the leaders must be informed. As long as the leaders could take the lead, the warriors under them would definitely not have any other ideas. In the past few years, some of the people in the tribe had become bolder. People's hearts were fickle and not all of them were on the same side. Usually, the shaman could pretend that he didn't know, but at this time, he wouldn't allow anyone to have any objections. The two shamans had the same idea. It wasn't that they were bossy and arbitrary, but they were afraid. The natural disaster that Xiao Xian mentioned was actually not the most important thing to them. What they were most worried about was whether the tribe would split again. If there was a difference in beliefs, would they encounter the same thing that happened to their ancestors 1,000 years ago? After all, this time, the situation might be similar to the disaster 1,000 years ago. Not long after, the 3 team leaders and 20 team leaders, after being informed, didn't dare to delay and ran over in the rain. The shaman briefly repeated Xiao Xian's words, then said, "What I mean is, our tribe should be prepared to leave." Although they were already mentally prepared, when they heard this decision, they still couldn't bear to leave. "Then, when will we leave?" Ao's voice was hoarse, and there was obvious fatigue on his face. There were dark circles around his eyes, and he hadn't slept well these days. In response to this question, the two shamans looked at each other, then at Xiao Xian at the same time. Xiao Xian paused, then said, "We'll leave as soon as the rain stops. In the next few days, everyone should be prepared. If you lose everything, you can start over again, but if you lose your life, you lose everything." The rain continued for a few more days, until one day it suddenly cleared up, and Yang Guang was radiant. However, the Yanjiao tribesmen's mood wasn't as radiant as Yang Guang's. They were already prepared to leave this place that they had devoted themselves to for more than 3 years. Chapter 572. The Yanjiao people were already feeling gloomy after leaving their homeland, which they had painstakingly rebuilt for 4 years. There were still unknown dangers and an uncertain future ahead of them. Everyone's emotions were very unstable. The meaning of the old haunt was different from other places. This was the root of the Flaming Horn tribe. However, without the fire seed, the meaning of the old haunt seemed to have changed a little. No matter what, the old haunt was different. Leaving this place, everyone's hearts were extremely complicated. Their footsteps were heavy. This was different from the last large-scale migration. Last time, they had embarked on the migration road with endless hope and longing, endless motivation, and a constant feeling of returning to their roots. But this time, they seemed to have felt the feelings of their ancestors 1,000 years ago. Although they were only leaving temporarily, would they really be able to return in the future? When they returned, would this place still be the same as before? The crops in the fields had all been harvested. The immature ones had been pulled out and brought away. The animals in the animal pens, except for some cubs, had all been slaughtered in advance to make jerky. In addition, the tribe had rushed out many carriages. There were oxen, horses, and other livestock to pull the carriages. There were also a few ferocious beasts in the tribe. They had pulled carriages before, so they were very experienced. This time there were many carriages. There were materials in the forest, as well as metal tools. Some parts of the beast carriages that were not suitable for use with stone tools could be replaced with metal tools. That way, the beast carriages could be made more sturdy. Therefore, compared to the last large-scale migration, there were many more people in the group this time. There were also many carriages. Among them, there were some beast carriages that were made to look like big boxes. No one was allowed to go near them. Except for a few people in the tribe, anyone who went near them would be severely punished. Inside the carriages were the veins of the sky that had been dug up again. The largest carriage was used as a temporary flower pot, and the 1,000-year-old veins of the sky had been transplanted there. If the weather was good, the guards would open the wooden boards above to let the plants bask in the sun. Fortunately, the veins of the sky were not as big as cabbages. Only the roots were a little damaged. After all, the longest part of the veins of the sky was its roots, which were like the pulse of a human. In the middle of the group, there were dozens of large carts filled with food, and there were also many guards around them. The people in the team did not bring much food. Most of the food was transported together. However, Yanjiao did not care about the wanderers. If they wanted to leave with the team, they could follow the team. If they did not want to follow, they could go wherever they wanted. Some of the tourists felt that Yanjiao was making a mountain out of a molehill and did not intend to leave. They even thought that after the Yanjiao left, they would go into the forest and live in the Yanjiao people's houses. They had been thinking about those solid stone houses for a long time. This time, the Yanjiao tribes were migrating, and no one could stop them. It was a good opportunity to occupy them. Maybe they could even live in the houses of the Yanjiao shamans and chiefs. He had to enjoy it. Some wanderers still decided to follow Yanjiao because they had learned their lesson from the previous changes. There weren't many people who left for other places. They were aware of the fact that they could either stay or leave with the Flaming Horns. If they didn't choose either option and went to other places, it would definitely be more difficult. They might not even have a chance to survive. The movement of more than 10,000 Yanjiao tribes was too obvious. It was impossible to avoid the eyes of others. In just 4 years, Yanjiao had migrated again. It was simply unbelievable. All the tribes who knew about this thought that Yanjiao was crazy. Did they think that migrating tribes was a game? How long had it been since the last migration? Why didn't they stop? Were they joking about the fire seed? Wait, where did they hide Yanjiao's fire seed? They did not seem to feel it. However, because the frequency of the earthquakes had increased, and the battle for water had become more intense, many people only talked about it at the beginning. After that, they no longer paid attention to Yanjiao. Those who were fighting for water continued to do what they were supposed to do. Of course, there were also people who tried to figure out what Yanjiao's actions meant. Xiao Xian had already sent people to inform the Lu tribe. The Hui tribe was too far away, so Gigu sent his snow falcon to inform them. After all, they were cooperating with the Lu tribe. They should be informed of the migration and be careful. The horses that pulled the carriages were domesticated by the Hui tribe. They were more reliable than those bought from other tribes. They were calmer in the face of danger. There were a lot of blind robbers on the road, but they were all mercilessly chopped down. There were even robbing gangs that were formed by people from the same tribe. Because they couldn't compete with other tribes and couldn't seize the water source, they changed their way of survival. Robbing. When robbing in a gang, the more people there were, the better. With a plan and premeditation, the success rate was much higher. After tasting the benefits, they became more ambitious and gradually shifted their target to larger group. This time, Yanjiao was targeted by them. It was because Yanjiao's carriages filled with food were too attractive. They could smell the smell even if they covered it with cloth. They did not want to give it up. And when it came to robbers, the Yanjiao people never held back. They killed whoever came. This year's rainy season lasted for a long time. After the rainy season ended, the time for the 2 moons to coincide was approaching. Until that day finally arrived. The 2 moons were full, illuminating the night as bright as day. Ever since they came here, the Yanjiao people had not experienced the fear of the 2 moons for a long time. Once again, it shrouded their hearts. Xiao Xian felt his eyelids twitch. A strong sense of uneasiness rose in his heart. Cold sweat inexplicably broke out, as if a basin of water had been poured over him. His bones felt like they were frozen. It was extremely cold. Xiao Xian, what's wrong? Jingluo asked. It was not that he was suspicious, but Xiao Xian did not look right. They're here. Xiao Xian said these 2 words almost without thinking, as if it was an unconscious reaction. Jingluo wanted to ask more, but the originally resting fearsome beasts suddenly stood up in fright. Then, the cows and horses pulling the carriages and other animals also became anxious. Boom! The earth rumbled without warning. The ground beneath their feet shook violently. Those who were asleep were jolted awake. Many people lost their balance and fell to the ground. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of the earth splitting open tore apart the peace in everyone's hearts. People were trembling uncontrollably due to extreme fear. Even though they had been warned of what they might encounter, even though they had been mentally preparing themselves, even though they had experienced earthquakes many times, this moment was something that they had never encountered before. Under the white night sky, between the cracks in the earth, a vast and terrifying aura rushed out. It was so powerful that no one could think of resisting. That wasn't something that any beast could do. Not even the beast kings that people thought to be unstoppable could have such destructive power. This was the power of heaven and earth. This time, it was not like the previous earthquakes that were just for fun. Then, there was a violent rumble that almost made everyone lose their hearing. The people in the group stared blankly at the place they had walked before resting. There, a rock wall with no end in sight rose from the ground. It was as if a pair of hands had broken off the earth. The ground shook violently, dispersing everyone's thoughts. At that moment, their minds were blank. Any kind of power could only be truly experienced after experiencing it personally. In the past, they could not understand why their powerful ancestors were forced to leave their homeland. Now they felt it. And this was just the beginning. The night was as bright as day. Everyone was anxious. Chapter 573. When the night gradually faded away and the 2 moons were finally replaced by the sun, the earthquake was still not over. Ferocious beast mountain forest. The chaos had already begun before the earthquake. The ferocious beasts who had a bad premonition took action first. Even if they were mortal enemies who fought for territory on normal days, now that they met in the forest, they would not look at each other. They were running for their lives. Perhaps because their level of evolution was higher than the other ferocious beasts in the forest, they could feel the approaching threat more clearly. They had no other thoughts now. There was only one thought in their minds, and that was like an instinctive reaction from the bottom of their hearts. Run. Run to a place far away from danger. Therefore, many ferocious beasts fled in all directions. Because of their movements, the forest was also stirred up. Until the roar came, the whole ground began to shake. The forest seemed to have completely lost its balance, and was in chaos. Fissures suddenly appeared in this mountain forest that was home to billions of creatures. Some of the beasts that couldn't escape in time fell directly into the fissures. They only had time to let out a cry of despair. The ferocious beasts who could not stop in time fell one after another. Those who managed to stop were also knocked down by the ferocious beasts behind them. They became the souls of the dead under the cracks. A ferocious beast used its powerful jumping ability to cross the cracks that had just appeared. However, it did not even have time to rejoice. In the next moment, a rock wall suddenly rose from the ground and appeared in front of it. The whole ground shook violently, constantly letting out deafening roars. No matter how majestic and ferocious the ferocious beasts were, at this moment, in front of such power, they could only tremble. The pool at the top of the volcano that Xiao Xian had seen before was long gone. Moreover, before Xiao Xian and the others left, there were warriors who went to check it out. In the depression, there were only some melted rock. And now, when the sun rose, with an earth-shattering bang, terrifying and violent volcanic ash and rocks shot high into the sky. The shock wave dispersed the clouds around the top of the mountain at a speed visible to the naked eye. It quickly spread out in a circle and spread further away. When the volcano erupted, the peaks of the few mountains near it collapsed instantly. The clouds above the mountain pass were even more vulnerable. They were completely pierced through by the black, yellow, and white rocks and dust. The sudden eruption of the volcano that had been dormant for nearly 1,000 years brought scorching hot air currents that poured down like a waterfall towards the surrounding forest. Crimson lava fiercely surged down from the mountain pass. Lightning appeared in the clouds and around the black and white smoke high up in the sky. It flickered as if there was a pair of gigantic hands holding the lightning and wantonly scribbling there. There was no pattern, and there was no intention of restraining it. More and more black smoke spewed out. The rising black smoke was like ink dyeing the sky black. It was even more powerful and overbearing than the dark clouds. Moreover, they were expanding at an extremely terrifying speed. The ferocious beasts in the forest ran with all their might. The huge and thick ancient trees were knocked to the ground. Some of the weaker beasts were directly knocked to death. They had no time to dodge at all. The carcass of the ferocious beast that had been killed by the tree didn't even last a second. In the next moment, it was trampled into mud by an even larger beast running from behind. The tree that had caused its death was directly knocked down. The cracking sounds were like the screams of the forest. All around them were frantic beasts. Big and small, they ran without any sense of reason. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause them to crash into each other. They were already so scared that they didn't have any ability to think. They could only rely on their instincts to run away from danger. As for the rest, they could only resign themselves to fate. This kind of situation was already beyond the control of these insignificant creatures. In the place where the Yanjiao tribe was located, there were still wanderers who hadn't left with the Yanjiao team. They had stayed here for the first 2 days and felt very comfortable. They had big houses to live in, and some people had even changed the houses that the shaman and chief had lived in. Because of this, a few wanderers had even fought for a while. They went to each house and found some things that the Yanjiao people had forgotten or didn't take with them. There were some abandoned gold wares and some food. They had originally planned to search all the houses in Yanjiao and then leave for other places. They weren't really stupid. It wasn't that they didn't know the danger here. They just took the risk out of desperation. They thought that after the Yanjiao left, they would pick up the leftovers and then leave with the trophies, to exchange for more things in other places. However, everything happened too fast. Before they had finished searching all the houses, the unforeseen event had already happened. The violent shaking of the ground had already caused nearly 2/3 of the houses to collapse. Among them, there were many stone houses that were once considered solid. However, under such an earthquake, they couldn't withstand it. However, the wanderers who stayed mainly lived in the core area of Yanjiao, where the chief, shaman, and leaders lived. Those houses were built by more powerful warriors. Compared to the other houses, the majority of the wanderers had survived that night. However, the remaining houses would not be able to hold out for much longer. But this time was different from the past. First, there was a shocking explosion. They didn't know what had happened. Countless beasts ran out of the forest. They were so scared that they didn't dare to go out of the house. Although there were beasts rushing out of the forest on the previous night when the moonlight was shining, there weren't as many beasts as there were now. The wanderer hiding in the shaman's house was so scared that his face was pale. Big drops of sweat fell down, and his whole body was trembling. Outside, large and small beasts ran past the house. The footsteps didn't mean to stop. Instead, they became more and more frequent. Some even directly hit the house. If the stone house hadn't been built solid, it would have collapsed. However, no matter how solid the stone house was, it couldn't withstand the continuous earthquake and the impact of the beast. The wanderer swallowed his saliva and reached out his trembling hand. He climbed up the low table on the wall and looked at the small window on the wall. The other windows in the house had already been blocked by him. Now there was only this small window left. He moved the wooden board away from the window and looked at the sky outside. The shaman lived in a good place. There wasn't much shelter. He could see the tall stone pillar in Yanjiao and the sky. Looking outside, the fear in the wanderer's eyes rose to the extreme. At that moment, he had given up on living. In the sky, the red clouds under the morning sun were quickly dyed black. The rolling ink-like black smoke covered the sky and was spreading out of the forest. The dense flock of birds tried their best to speed up and leave this hellish place before the black smoke. However, they were still overtaken and swallowed into the darkness. The light of the day was quickly dimming. Rocks and other things were thrown out of the ejecting place like cannonballs. They smashed everywhere in the forest. Even the edge of the forest and outside the forest were not spared. The tall stone pillar that stood near the fire pit was the one that Xiao Xian rebuilt later. The original one survived the disaster 1,000 years ago but was destroyed by the Wancher people. The new one wasn't as lucky as the old one. This time, the disaster was more serious than the one 1,000 years ago. Bang! 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 The falling stones smashed down one after another, smashing into the house and the stone pillar, causing stone chips to fly everywhere. The roars of the beasts, the explosions, and the sound of the rocks hitting each other intertwined. It was so loud that no one could hear anything else. When the last light disappeared, it was pitch black all around. The explosions continued. The panicked beasts were still frantically looking for a way out in desperation. The black smoke in the sky continued to spread. Below, it was like the end of the world. Chapter 574. At the place where Xiao Xian and the others were resting, they also heard the deafening sound of the eruption. It wasn't just at the Yanjiao team's resting place. Some tribes even further away heard it too, but they didn't know what it was. Originally, they planned to continue their journey after taking a rest. Before they left the tribe, they had discussed several times. Finally, according to the simple route left by their ancestors, they selected some places where the tectonic plate movements were not so strong. In Xiao Xian's opinion, the places outside the earthquake zone would always be safer. Xiao Xian didn't draw out a long route. Back then, their ancestors walked directly to where the drumming tribe was today. Xiao Xian's route was inland. With such strong seismic activity, He didn't know what would happen at the edge of the mainland. Although inland was also dangerous, it was safer. Now, they were only halfway along the route. They hadn't really reached the inland and were still some distance away from the big tribes. The snow falcon that delivered the letter to the Hui tribe had just returned. It came back trembling and landed on Gigu's shoulder. It wouldn't fly no matter what. Should we continue? Ao stabilized his shaking body and asked Xiao Xian. The earthquake was still going, but it was sometimes weak and sometimes strong. When it was weak, they could barely walk. When it was strong, they couldn't even stand. That was why everyone was panicking. No. Xiao Xian shook his head. He looked at the sky and said to Ao and Jingluo, "Continue to rest here. We might not be able to leave for a few days." The two chiefs' hearts skipped a beat. "We can't leave? What do you mean? Was there something worse?" This was the result of Xiao Xian's rope divination when the earthquake was weak before the sun appeared. "At least 5 days. We might have to rest first. Tell everyone to get ready. Don't go near the cracks. Don't get separated. Take out your hats," Xiao Xian said. Although they didn't know why Xiao Xian said that, the two leaders still followed Xiao Xian's instructions. The group that was slightly scattered due to the earthquake gathered together. Food and water were distributed, and the hats that they had made before leaving the tribe were also taken out. Not long after, the sentinel exclaimed. Everyone looked in that direction. On the horizon, darkness was spreading towards them at an extremely fast speed. "That direction is..." Ao's voice trembled. That was the direction of the ferocious beast mountain forest, and the black sky was coming from there. The spreading blackness caused a lot of panic. "What is that? What's going on?" The restless ferocious beasts and reared animals were forcibly held down. Xiao Xian comforted Caesar, and then said to old Ku, who was leaning against Caesar, "Put on your hat." It didn't take long for the black sky to spread above the group. Under the black smoke, dust and small pieces of rock fell, hitting people's hats made of different materials and making a fine tinkling sound. Because they were already some distance away from the forest, large pieces of rock wouldn't fall here. Most of it was dust and small pieces of rock. For the tribesmen, it was fine as long as they wore their hats. An old warrior covered his face with a thick linen cloth to block the flying dust. He wore a large animal skin cloak and held his child in his arms. He wrapped the cloak so that only a small mouth could be seen. Pulling on the leather rope tied to his chin, the old man pulled back the hat made of big nut shells from the forest that had been blown up by the wind. He knocked on the hat to shake off some of the dust on the hat, and then looked at where the leaders were. Although it was very dark now, he could still see some moving figures. As long as the elders, leaders, shamans, and leaders were all here, they should be fine. It had to be said that Xiao Xian's actions did indeed calm people down and reduce a lot of panic. Many people felt that the elders and shamans must have expected such a situation and must have countermeasures. In fact, Xiao Xian didn't have any countermeasures. Up until now, he had tried to predict the future with his knot divination, but he hadn't succeeded. Maybe it wasn't time yet, or maybe he didn't have enough ability. He could only endure. If he could survive this ordeal, perhaps he would be able to find out more. The black smoke in the sky covered Yangguang, and the surrounding temperature dropped a little. According to Xiao Xian's divination results, the situation would remain like this for at least 5 days. Moreover, Xiao Xian knew in his heart that even if they survived this disaster and returned to the fearsome beast forest, it would be impossible for them to farm in a short period of time. As for prey, it would probably be difficult to find them. How many beasts in the forest could survive this change? If Yanjiao returned, how would they survive? Xiao Xian looked at the dark sky and thought hard. At the same time, in the distant sea, there were also some eruptions similar to the one in the fearsome beast forest. There was also black smoke spewing out, spreading from several places and finally covering everything under the black smoke. The volcano in the fearsome beast forest had its peak cut down by hundreds of meters. Moreover, as the volcanic ash and magma continued to erupt, this change continued. Waves that were hundreds of meters high rose from the surface of the sea and surged forward. Then, even higher waves followed closely behind, one after another, crashing toward the land. In the desert, darkness was spreading. Some wandering slaves were screaming in horror. They didn't know what was going on, but not long after, they couldn't scream anymore. The waves hit the desert and swallowed everything near the coast. The people who thought that they could survive and build their own power lost all hope. The people of Rock Hill City rarely cleaned up the forces near the coast. In the past, many people didn't understand. There were even some remnants of the slave masters who were rising up, but the people of Rock Hill City didn't care. Now, some people suddenly had a strange thought. Did the people of Rock Hill City know that this would happen? However, even if they were confused, they couldn't find the answer. A series of tsunamis swallowed up nearly a third of the desert. To be exact, it wasn't swallowed up. A large part of the desert that was swallowed up had disappeared along with the violent shaking of the ground. In other parts of the desert, even places that weren't hit by the tsunamis were not peaceful. Sand waterfalls that sprayed out without warning or sudden sinking of quicksand swallowed many people and beasts. Many places were in a state of panic. The calmest place was probably Rock Hill City. Even if there were big changes in the surroundings, the place where Rock Hill City was located wasn't affected much. There was an impact, but it was small. Although there was an earthquake here, it wasn't very active. There was also no quicksand or sand waterfall. The tsunami's impact had been greatly reduced not far from Rock Hill City. To Rock Hill City, it was really not a big deal. A long time ago, someone asked the king of Rock Hill City why he built a city here. With Rock Hill City's strength, they could have taken a better place. The king of Rock Hill City smiled but didn't say anything. Every king of Rock Hill City knew the reason but never told others. Even many of the Schur family's descendants didn't know the reason. Only the successor had the right to know. The darkness continued. As the earth quaked and mountains swayed, no one knew just how great of a change had taken place. Chapter 575. On this continent, there was almost no place that was peaceful. Xiao Xian had no way of knowing how the people in other places were doing. In this world, there was no need to expect anyone to rescue them when they encountered a disaster. You had to rely on yourself. The earthquake was still going on, and the darkness in the sky had not dissipated. 2 days had passed, but there was still no light. A thick layer of dust had accumulated on the ground. If you lay still on the ground on the first day, you would be buried by the falling dust on the second day. In the darkness, in the midst of the earthquake, large tents were set up in the tribe. Xiao Xian had made these tents before he left the tribe. The tents were made of animal skin, which was much stronger than linen. The tents were set up with specially made metal poles, which were tied with the strongest rattan rope. The poles were tied to large stones that were carried over. 2 or 3 warriors sat on the large stones. If the stones rolled to other places due to the earthquake, they would move them back to maintain the stability of each tent. In the tents, there were children and women without totemic power, old people who could not move freely, and wounded people who had been injured in the earthquake. Many people were injured in the earthquake, and their meridians were severely damaged. If it was in the past, their injured hands and feet would be crippled, or their lives would be in danger. However, with the veins of the sky, the situation was different. Not only could they save their hands and feet, but they could also save their lives. Xiao Xian walked quickly in the team. Others needed to rely on the water moon stone to illuminate the surroundings, but he did not. If there were people who were seriously injured, he could find them faster. He called a team of people who were responsible for transporting the wounded. Xiao Xian and the others carried the injured people to the tent. Inside, Guizhe brought over a batch of newly made medicine and distributed it to the people who were taking care of the wounded. "How is the situation?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's okay for now. There are not many who are seriously injured." Guizhe handed a small pouch made of animal skin to Xiao Xian. "There are some newly made medicines inside. Distribute them to the other warriors, they will feel better." Xiao Xian opened the animal skin bag and took a look inside. The bag was filled with small pills, but the amount was smaller than usual. They had to be frugal now. No one knew what would happen later, so they had to keep some medicinal herbs in reserve. If it wasn't for the fact that his injuries were critical, he would have been more frugal with his medicine. Xiao Xian could understand this. In the past, when Xiao Xian was studying herbs in the tribe's medicine house, he had tried to make pills. Later, when everyone saw that pills were more convenient, they gradually began to adapt to such pills. As for the pills that Guizhe made in the past 2 days, because of the dust falling from the sky and the unpleasant smell in the air, many people in the team had developed some minor problems. The warriors were better off, as they had a stronger resistance, so the symptoms were not obvious. However, those who had not awakened their totemic power were unlucky. They could not breathe properly and their lungs were damaged. Even if they were covered with linen cloth, it was useless. The pills that Guizhe gave them were for this situation. The warriors would not stay in the tent like those who did not have totemic power. They had to be outside to guard against all kinds of dangers, and they also had to look for the injured. Their bodies were more or less affected. Although they could not see it now, it did not mean that they would be safe in the future. Therefore, it was always good to take some medicine as a precaution. When Xiao Xian went outside to distribute the pills, he bumped into Duokong, who was coughing. He was annoyed by the linen cloth, so he took off the linen cloth that covered most of his face. As a result, the dust that fell off was inhaled into his nose, and he choked until he almost collapsed. "It's time to take your medicine." Xiao Xian handed him a pill. "Although it's uncomfortable to cover your face with linen, it's still better than you." Xiao Xian did not need to say more. Duokong was already regretting it. He stuffed the pill that Xiao Xian handed him into his mouth, and took a big gulp of water from the water bottle that was hanging on his waist. The refreshing feeling dispersed the pain in his throat from coughing, and his breathing became smoother. After he recovered, Duokong sat on the ground. He did not care about the layer of dust on the ground, and asked Xiao Xian, "What should we do from now on?" Xiao Xian knew that they were starting to panic. Not only Duokong, but the others, the chief, the shaman, the various leaders, and even the soldiers who did not say anything but looked worried and anxious, were all worried. After all, they had never encountered such a thing before. After these 2 days, no one could remain calm. Xiao Xian thought for a while and called Tuo, who had just left the tent after sending the injured, over. He passed the pouch with the pills to him, and asked him to distribute the rest of the pills to those who had not taken the pills. Then, like Duokong, he sat on the ground, tilted his head, and patted the layer of dust on his hat. He took out a straw rope from his pocket. When Duokong saw Xiao Xian like this, he quickly took out a water moon stone to light up the area, so that he could see more clearly. In these 2 days, Xiao Xian had also performed a divination. He could only tell that it was temporarily safe to stay here. There were 3 places where the earthquake was the strongest. One was in the fearsome beast forest, one was in the direction of the desert, and the last one was much weaker than the first 2. It was in the direction of the great river that the ancestors had taken. This place was not close to the 3 most dangerous places. Although there were earthquakes, it was enough to be a temporary resting place. Once again, Xiao Xian immersed himself in the knot divination. Perhaps it was because he had experienced so much, and the changes that happened in the past 2 days, his ability to predict things had become stronger. With his current ability, the number of things that he could divine gradually increased. Therefore, Xiao Xian was now performing 2 divinations a day. He hoped that he could divine more things. At such a time, the more he knew, the higher his chances of survival. During one of the 2 divinations a day, Xiao Xian would divine the location of the path of survival and the direction that the tribe should go. Even if he wanted to use the fire seed, it was impossible. Now that there was no fire seed, even the shamans could not know the correct path from the totemic flames in their bodies. Under the weather, the fire seed was powerless. Sometimes, it was better to rely on one's intuition. Xiao Xian's intuition was to follow the path that the ancestors had taken. However, he was leading a tribe after all. If he was not confident, he would not act rashly. After the divination, Xiao Xian looked at the knot that was finally tied. He understood the meaning of the knot and felt slightly relieved. As expected. What's the result? Ao, who was watching from not far away, could not help but walk over. He just wanted to check on the wounded, but when he saw Xiao Xian sitting there with a straw rope in his hand, he suddenly understood. However, he did not dare to disturb Xiao Xian. He knew a lot, and he also understood that knot divination was not so easy to succeed. In addition, the current situation made him even more nervous, so he did not dare to take a step in that direction. Now that he saw Xiao Xian successfully tying the knot, he could not wait to come over. When the earthquake stops and the sky clears up, we will go that way. Xiao Xian pointed in a direction and said, "That way? Follow the path that the ancestors took?" Ao asked. "Yes." Chapter 576. In fact, as long as there was a definite conclusion, it would be a very good comfort. Xiao Xian's conclusion was undoubtedly a reassurance to everyone. But what followed was a complicated feeling. After all, that direction was not the direction of the old haunt. After leaving the old haunt, they couldn't go back? Were they abandoning the old haunt? 4 years. 4 years of cultivation and construction were all gone. In the end, they couldn't stay in Yanjiao's glorious old haunt. What a depressing fact. In fact, long before the disaster began, some people were already mentally prepared. They would probably leave the old haunt like their ancestors and find a new place to live temporarily. Then, one day, their descendants would go back to the old haunt, right? But at the same time, some people had other ideas. After all, the old haunt was so attractive and cohesive, not only because it was Yanjiao's old haunt, but also because it was the fire seed. The fire seed's fire vein was in the old haunt. Back then, the fire seed was not complete. If they wanted the fire seed to be complete, they had to go back to the old haunt. But now, not only was the fire seed complete, but it had also undergone a huge change. It had been integrated into the blood of the Yanjiao people and would be passed down generation after generation with the Yanjiao people. Without the fire seed, the old haunt's meaning was still special, but it was no longer a place they had to stay. From the moment they chose to integrate the fire seed, this was the result they had decided. The earthquake under the darkness was still going on, as if the earth was carrying out some kind of plan. Under the darkness, the insignificant people had no way of knowing the truth. Only when the darkness receded and the earth stabilized could they explore. 3 days later, after a loud bang and intense shaking, the tremors began to slow down and were less frequent. After the last violent tremor, the number of injured people increased again. There were also casualties in the group. Fortunately, the number of deaths was not high. The thick black smoke in the sky began to fade after the earthquake slowed down. The change wasn't fast, but it was obvious. After a while, one could see some moving figures even without the help of the water moon stones. This was a good sign. The team began to reorganize and count the number of people. Although the change this time was earth-shattering and made people confused, most of them survived. Even the wanderers who had been following the Yanjiao team survived. In a small tent, Xiao Xian, the shaman, the chief, and the leaders were all gathered there to decide on the next step of the plan. So far, it was almost the same as Xiao Xian's divination. Therefore, everyone did not doubt the direction that Xiao Xian said they should go in the future. However, they were still thinking about the old place, especially Ao and the others. The reconstruction of the old place was almost done by their hands little by little. But now, it might all be destroyed. How about this? Xiao Xian said after thinking for a while. When the earthquake stops and the sun rises, send some people to the old haunt to check it out. Whether they can continue to live there or not, we have to be prepared. The shaman nodded in agreement. Of course. If it weren't for the fact that his body couldn't keep up, the shaman also wanted to go and check it out. However, in the current situation, it was better to hurry up. He didn't want to be a burden and let the stronger soldiers rush over. As long as they could get a result, whether it was good or bad, it could make people feel relieved. A day later, although the sky was still gray, compared to the complete darkness of the previous few days, it was much more reassuring. At least now they could tell when it was day and when it was night. The earthquake had made people dizzy and confused. They had no sense of direction or concept of time. Now everything was finally coming back. Everything was stabilizing. Xiao Xian and the others had to take action first. They wanted to go to the old haunt. As the shaman said, they were always thinking about it. They would feel uneasy if they didn't take a look. They might feel even more uneasy if they took a look. Xiao Xian thought to himself. The team couldn't all return here, so only about 20 people were chosen. In terms of feelings for the old haunt, naturally, those who first set foot here had deeper feelings. Therefore, when choosing people, they mainly chose people from Ao's side. Although Zheng Luo's people also wanted to take a look, they weren't that obsessed. Secondly, there were more Yanjiao people here. They needed to stay here and guard. The group of 20 people ran towards the old haunt. A thick layer of dust was lifted from the ground. Everywhere they went, they left behind a trail of dust. The dust in the sky hadn't dispersed completely. Yang Guang couldn't see clearly, but it was enough for him to see everything around him. If it wasn't for the blurry sun in the sky, they wouldn't be able to tell where they were. Everything had changed. The ground rose and fell. The low ground had become high cliffs. The few hills they passed on the way were still there, but others had disappeared. There were no living things on the ground. Perhaps there were bones buried under the thick dust. Perhaps there were lives that survived the disaster. Occasionally, some birds could be seen flying in the sky. It gave people a feeling of confusion. At this time, those who were hiding didn't have the courage to come out immediately. Xiao Xian and the others returned to the old haunt. They didn't see anyone else. This is it. Xiao Xian stopped and looked ahead. Here? You're saying this is Yanjiao's old haunt? How is that possible? Ao was so shocked that he almost jumped up. The shock in his eyes was obvious. His face was trembling as he tried his best to turn his head and look at everything in front of him. In front of them, it was the same as the other places they had passed. It was even more flat. Other than the color of the dust on the ground, it looked like a desert. But Xiao Xian said this was the old haunt? Ao began to tremble all over. Xiao Xian took 2 steps forward. Then he pulled out his sword and swept away the thick dust under his feet. Under the dust, there were many pieces of gravel that couldn't be seen clearly. Some of them were stained with brown blood. Perhaps they were left behind by the beasts that had fled from the forest. Or perhaps they were left behind by the wanderers who hadn't left. Xiao Xian could see through the layer of dust and see a little of the scene below. In places where the ground bulged, there were piles of stones from collapsed buildings. There were also corpses of giant beasts that had already died. The giant beasts that had once been so arrogant in the forest couldn't escape this disaster. Under the power of heaven and earth, all living things were ant. Perhaps there were all kinds of creatures in the depths of the forest that had escaped this disaster. But right now, the Yanjiao people were only concerned about the ruins of the old haunt. Even if there were other places in the forest where people could continue to live, they were no longer the old haunt. In the hearts of the Yanjiao people, they were no longer the old haunt. The black dust under his feet had a pungent smell. Xiao Xian picked up a stone and pulled it up. It was only half a meter long and incomplete. If it weren't for the patterns on it, Xiao Xian wouldn't have recognized it. This was the stone pillar that he had personally engraved the patterns on. Now, the stone pillar had fallen, and the cracks were even more severe than the one that had been destroyed by Wan Shi. There were already many craters on this piece of wreckage, and the original patterns had been destroyed. One could only imagine the situation at that time. This was much more terrifying than what their ancestors had encountered. Although the old haunt had changed a lot after their ancestors left, many things had been preserved. The forest was still there. But now, as far as the eye could see, there was only one word to describe it: destruction. It was a complete and utter destruction. After 4 years, all traces of life were gone. The dense forest and towering mountain peaks were all gone. All that was left was a wasteland. Even Ao, who had always been calm and steady, couldn't help but choke with sobs. Some of the warriors cried, "Pitter-patter! Pitter-patter!" Drops of rain fell from the sky, and soon became rapid. The raindrops hit the wasteland, splashing up a lot of dust. There was a lingering smell of destruction in the air. The rain began to wash away the haze in the sky. Some gray rain fell on Xiao Xian's face, leaving mud-like marks. A group of 20 people stood in the rain in silence for nearly an hour. Then, they knelt towards the land, performing the highest ceremony of the tribe, offering sacrifice and farewell. Perhaps they wouldn't be able to live here again in their lifetime. Perhaps, one day in the future, their descendants would bring the tribe back to this homeland that had been restored. Even if there were still unstable factors lurking here, an old place was still an old place. This was the persistence of the tribesmen. The rain became heavier, and the dust on the ground turned into mud. After kneeling on the ground, the group of people were covered in black mud. But at this time, no one cared. When they got up, the sorrow in their eyes had disappeared, and what was left was determination. There was still a road behind them. They had only walked a small part of that road, and the rest of the tribe was waiting for them. Looking at the old haunt on the wasteland again, the group of 20 people turned and left. Chapter 577. When they returned to the team, the weather had begun to clear up. After the continuous darkness and turbidity, they saw the clear sky again, which made them feel much more relaxed. A rainbow appeared in the distance. However, at this time, no one wanted to take a look at those wonders at all. They were all worried about the future. During the time when Xiao Xian and the others left for the old haunt, several groups of people were sent out to inquire about the situation in different directions. Knowing more information about other places would be beneficial for Yanjiao's later actions. When Xiao Xian and the others returned from the old haunt, several groups that had gone out also came back one after another not long after them. According to them, there wasn't a single place that wasn't damaged. However, some tribes suffered heavy losses, and the terrain changed greatly. The ground cracked, and countless houses collapsed, and some even disappeared. However, some places didn't suffer as much damage. The most obvious ones were the places where the large tribes were located. Some small and medium-sized tribes were hit to varying degrees, but comparatively speaking, the big tribes, such as the Mang tribe, the Eight Limbs tribe, the Longboat tribe and so on, suffered some losses, but to the whole tribe it was not too big of a blow, and didn't hurt their bones. Where they were, the earthquake was not too violent. In terms of degree, it was probably similar to where we were resting. The returning soldiers said, "I heard that thousands of years ago, many tribes were not in their current positions. For example, the Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe were not close to each other. They migrated later." Ao said. In the past 4 years, he had learned a lot of information from the people in the traveling group. It seems that they also migrated at that time. It's just that they did not migrate far away and occupied several relatively stable places. That's why they suffered less damage during the catastrophe. Xiao Xian said. Every tribe settled down for a reason. They wouldn't settle down there for no reason. Just like how the flaming horns used to live in the fearsome beast forest, they hunted for prey. For a tribe that no longer hunted for a living, a relatively stable land with fertile soil and a water source was a very good place to settle down. No wonder those tribes didn't do anything. They were already prepared. The shaman sighed. It was because the ancestors of those few tribes had occupied several relatively stable and convenient places to develop during the earthquake that they were able to avoid the disaster of that year and this time. However, some small tribes that happened to be in the areas where the earthquake was intense were unlucky, and some of them were even exterminated. That's why a good place is so important. The two shamans sighed in unison. However, how could a good place be so easy to find? Back then, Yanjiao lived in the ferocious beast mountain forest, which was far away from the few places where the earthquake was relatively weak. They didn't have time to fight for territory, so later on, the tribe had to travel far away to find a place to live. So where would Yanjiao go this time? In fact, as early as when Xiao Xian pointed in that direction, Wu and Ao had thought that it might be the place where they used to live, but they immediately denied it. After all, there was still a river that they couldn't see on the other side of. At this time of the year, how could they get there? Or would they have to wait another year to get there? After the people who went out returned, the group set off again. This time, they went directly in the direction that Xiao Xian had pointed out. The old land had been destroyed, and they couldn't go back to live in the short term. They had to find a new place to start over. Although the old land had been destroyed, the harvest of the past 4 years couldn't be erased. Pottery, metalware, textiles, farming, breeding, and so on had made great progress. After being isolated from the world, Yanjiao people were like dry sponges, crazily absorbing everything. In the past 4 years, too many changes had happened, especially the fire seed. Without the power of the fire seed, would the group disperse? This was a huge stone hanging in the hearts of the shaman and the chief. However, they had to take it one step at a time. First, they had to find a new place to live. Xiao Xian looked at the new knot. He just wanted to confirm where the road was. How is it? The two chiefs next to him stared at Xiao Xian nervously. Follow the original plan. Keep going in that direction. Xiao Xian balled up the rope in his hand and squeezed it with his fingers, crushing the knotted rope into bits of grass. In fact, Xiao Xian had thought about whether the knot divination was pointing to the place where they had lived in the past. After all, in terms of living conditions, it was indeed a very good place. It was very suitable for the Yanjiao people. Otherwise, the Yanjiao tribe wouldn't have been able to live there for nearly 1,000 years and still be living well. However, the river was the biggest obstacle. The long group continued to move in that direction. Many of the carriages and ox carts had been destroyed in the disaster, so they couldn't accommodate more people. Sometimes they used animals to carry the injured. Along the way, they encountered many robbers. However, Yanjiao had many people and tight defenses, so they didn't let the robbers succeed. Most of the robbers were from small tribes. The disaster of their tribes was almost a devastating blow to them. They had no food and no manpower, so they could only crazily fight for the loot. Yanjiao's route was different from when they first went to the old haunt. After all, they spent more time on boats back then, but now they were walking. Some of the big and small rivers that had dried up were now gradually rising. Although they didn't know what was going on, this trend was always good. The Yanjiao tribe moved again. The news of the destruction of Yanjiao's old haunt was spread by some long-distance trading teams. More and more people knew about it. Naturally, there were people who were doubtful. Along the way, they even met people from the Longboat tribe who came over and said that they could help, provided that Yanjiao gave them something in exchange. The Longboat tribe was after the green-faced fanged beasts. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts in Yanjiao's group were drugged when they left the tribe. When the earthquake happened, the 7 beasts were unconscious. Now they seemed to be waking up. Fortunately, they were enslaved by Xiao Xian, so their aggression was restrained. After the Longboat tribe brought back the green-faced fanged beasts they caught in the mountains, they tried to forge them. Unfortunately, they didn't succeed. However, they learned some things and wanted to try again, but they didn't have the materials. Coincidentally, Yanjiao's disaster happened, so they wanted to take this opportunity to make a deal. Yanjiao refused. Most of the Longboat tribe's ships were damaged, and they didn't have enough materials to rebuild them. After all, although the earthquake didn't affect them much and they didn't have many casualties, many trees were destroyed. They were short on materials. If they built a ship now, the quality would be lacking. Yanjiao didn't want to make this deal. They wouldn't tell the other tribes the secret of the new bronze wares. Even if they needed a ship, they could make it themselves. However, building a ship took time and a lot of materials. If they couldn't complete it, it was better to travel on foot. Besides, the water level in each river was rising. It wasn't as deep as it used to be. It might not be convenient to sail on it. Other than the Longboat tribe, the other tribes also had the same idea. However, they were all busy with their own affairs. They didn't lose much in the disaster, but they didn't lose much either. They had to reorganize, so they couldn't take care of Yanjiao for the time being. Days passed. When the Yanjiao team finally arrived at the drumming tribe was busy with reconstruction work. When they heard the whistle from the patrolling warriors, they thought it was an enemy invasion. They didn't expect it to be the Yanjiao people they hadn't seen in a few years. Chapter 578. The people of the drumming tribe had a deep impression of Yanjiao. They didn't have much contact with other tribes, but Yanjiao's appearance that year was too special. They even helped them, so they remembered clearly. However, the last time they saw the Yanjiao tribe, there weren't so many people. The people of the drumming tribe were happy to see Xiao Xian again after 4 years, especially Fu Shi, who was familiar with Xiao Xian. But when they saw the Yanjiao team, they couldn't help but be curious. You're migrating again? They just moved here 4 years ago, and now they want to leave again? This tribe migrated too frequently. Although it was because of the natural disaster, the frequency of migration was too high for the tribesmen. Fu Shi's words were unintentional, but it made the Yanjiao people's faces bitter. If they weren't forced to do so, who would be willing to give up 4 years of hard work to build their homeland and come all the way here again? The closer they got, the more familiar Ao, Gigu, Ta, and the others felt. A thought rose in their minds again. Could it be that they really had to go back to where they lived before? The more they thought about it, the faster their hearts beat. Compared to finding a new place, they obviously preferred their old forest. Even if there were some shortcomings, tribesmen were nostalgic, especially for land. One could imagine how they felt at this moment. So, before Fu Shi could say anything, Ao asked, "Is there any change in the river? Have the river beasts returned? Can the boat sail on it?" Ao's series of questions made Fu Shi's expression strange. The warriors of the drumming tribe beside him also had complicated expressions. Xiao Xian saw this and asked, "What's wrong? What's changed in the river?" "Change? Of course." Fu Shi pointed in the direction of the river. "Did you notice that the sound of the river changed?" "The sound of the river?" Because they didn't often move around in the water, Yanjiao people were weaker than the drumming tribe in this aspect. "I didn't hear it," Ao said honestly. Fu Shi didn't look down on him. His eyes showed a complicated expression. "The sound of the river is gone. In other words, the river is no longer there." At this point, Fu Shi also sighed. Back then, when they left the riverbank to seek refuge, they were almost thrown out by the earthquake. They tied themselves and their families to tree trunks or higher terrain. There were many mountains here and few flat land. Even if they wanted to hide, they would hide from one mountain to another. No one wanted to leave this place and go further away. Because the fire seed was here, no one was willing to go further away. Later, everything stopped. When he tried to go to the riverbank, he found that their former village had been destroyed. All the houses had collapsed. If they hadn't escaped in time and stayed far away from the riverbank like the crocodiles, perhaps many of them would have been buried in the disaster not long ago. What shocked them even more was what happened on the other side of the river. At that time, Fu Shi and the other warriors of the drumming tribe stood by the river bank and looked forward. Everywhere they looked, the scenery had changed. The Yanjiao people were prepared to wait another year, but when they heard Fu Shi's words, they were all shocked. Even Xiao Xian wondered if they should wait for another year until the rainy season ended and boats could travel on the river. Along the way, they had discussed how to build a boat, but now, Fu Shi said that the river had disappeared. This shocked the Yanjiao people so much that they doubted their own ears. How could such a huge river disappear just like that? Moreover, according to what the drumming tribe said, all the changes were only completed in those 5 days, under the condition of day and night. "I'll take you to see it," Fu Shi sighed and walked over. Letting the people in the team stay here, Xiao Xian and the 2 chiefs went to the riverbank together. There were crocodiles of all sizes moving around. A brown-eyed crocodile quickly crawled over to Xiao Xian. It was the little crocodile from before. After a few years, it had grown a lot. At first sight, it didn't recognize Xiao Xian, but after Fu Shi's reminder, Xiao Xian recognized it. But now Xiao Xian was thinking about the river. He patted the brown-eyed crocodile's head and quickly followed Fu Shi. The drumming tribe's original residence had been destroyed. If it wasn't destroyed in the earthquake, then it was buried by the mudslide brought by the rain. In short, it was uninhabitable and had to be rebuilt. Fortunately, most of the people were still there, and the fire seed was still there. This was already the best result. "It's there. See for yourselves." Fu Shi pointed ahead. In front of them was a small hill, but there was no way to see the other side. Walking up the hill, there were no other obstacles in front of them. Xiao Xian could see clearly what was on the other side. It's really." Ao's voice trembled. Gigu, Ta, and the others were all in disbelief. Who wouldn't be shocked to see such a big river suddenly become a small river and still be able to see the scenery on the other side? It's really there. Ta was too excited and stuttered. The others couldn't understand, but the Yanjiao people knew. The other side was where they used to live. The mountains seemed to have become taller, and there were many uneven places at the foot of the mountain. Rocks with edges protruded from the ground, like ferocious beasts baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. Further up, they could see the traces of their lives, even if the houses had collapsed. Their heavy breathing, red faces, and the excitement of the Yanjiao people puzzled Fu Shi. "That's where we used to live." Ao took a deep breath. The pain and sorrow of the destruction of the old homeland faded when he saw the situation on the other side. They had lived in the old homeland for 4 years, but on the other side they had lived for decades. How could they not have feelings? When they left that year, they had thought that after leaving, they would probably never come back. Even though the shaman said that the Yanjiao could use that place as a backup plan, and if they didn't do well, they could go back. But later, after the Yanjiao tribes returned to the old homeland and developed better and better, they gradually stopped thinking about the other side. Occasionally, they would still dream of the place where they used to live, the dangerous forest, and the familiar hunting routes. "I didn't expect this, ha. I didn't expect this." Ao took another deep breath, and then let out a long breath, as if he was spitting out all the depression in his heart. "It's here, right, Xian?" Ao stared at the other side of the river and said, "Yes, it's here." Xiao Xian was now sure that the result of the divination was there. Years ago, the ancestors left the old homeland due to a natural disaster and came here. As a result, the earth cracked and the river formed, cutting off their path of return. And now, 1,000 years later, there was another change that was even greater than back then. The earth that had been split open was now closed. The river that had existed for 1,000 years was gone. Only a small trace was left, a small river that wasn't too deep or wide, and one could see the scenery on the other side of the river. There was probably no other backup plan that could comfort the Yanjiao people more than this. Chapter 579. When the tribe crossed the river, many of the children were still young. For years later, some of them had already become totemic warriors. Now that they knew what was on the other side of the river, and that was the destination of the tribe, the Yanjiao people who lived on the other side of the river were no longer depressed. Their moods had been fluctuating all this time. Even though the crisis was over, they had no place to stay. They were like rootless duckweeds, unable to settle down. But now they could finally let go. They couldn't go back to the old place, but it was fine, they had another old place. Yes, for the entire Yanjiao tribe, the fearsome beast forest was the Yanjiao's old place. But for these people, the other side of the river was another old place in their hearts. Even though there were some changes in the earthquake, even though they couldn't see the whole thing from here, they could still recognize many familiar places. That's right, that was the other homeland in their hearts. Ao, Ta, Guihi, Mai, and the rest of the team leaders were all very excited about the turn of events. Chief, are we going back? Someone asked, choking. The word go back moved many people, and they couldn't help but smile. Ao also showed a rare look of nostalgia. Yes, let's go back. Awoo, someone in the group screamed. Haha, let's go back. Some of the younger warriors jumped up in excitement. They thought they would have to find a new place to stay, but they didn't expect to come back here. They were still children when they left. 4 years later, they had been out hunting for a year or two. Seeing their excitement, Jingluo and the others calmed down. After all, they hadn't lived there before, and all they knew was from other people. That's where you used to live? Jingluo asked Xiao Xian. I can't believe it changed like this. But then they remembered that there was a large forest on the other side, and it was no less dangerous than the fearsome beast forest. There were even king beasts roaming around and many other strange places. Jingluo and the others didn't feel any fear. Instead, they rubbed their palms together, their eyes shining. It's a good place. Duo Kong only glanced over and commented. Although he couldn't see the place he had heard of, with his many years of hunting experience, it was definitely a satisfactory place. Even the wind from the opposite shore carried a dangerous smell. It really made people look forward to it. There are ferocious beasts over there. Duo Kang's hands were itching again. For people who hunted for a living, hunting had become a habit in their daily life. Once this habit was broken, and they did not touch it for a long time, they would feel itchy to hunt. He missed the smell of the jungle. Hearing Duo Kang's words, Fu Shi laughed. You can smell the beasts from here? Of course. Duo Kong said confidently. It smells like the fearsome beast forest. Fu Shi smiled and didn't say much. He turned to Xiao Xian and asked, Can you smell it? Xiao Xian stared at the opposite shore, deep in thought. Yes, I can feel the ferocious beasts over there. After a pause, Xiao Xian added, The smell is quite familiar. Just as Xiao Xian finished speaking, Caesar squeezed over and looked at the opposite shore for a while. Then, he raised his head and howled. Caesar's sudden howl brought the Yanjiao back to reality. He smiled and said, Even Caesar remembers the old place. Of course, Caesar grew up there too. Mai couldn't hide the smile on his face. He remembered that the few ferocious beasts in the tribe who used the secret technique of carving also grew up there. If people missed it, so did the ferocious beasts. However, Xiao Xian didn't see it that way. Caesar's howl was not a sign of nostalgia. But before he could say anything, Ao couldn't wait to ask Fu Shi again. Didn't you go over to take a look? After all, the river was gone. The two sides were so close and the river wasn't deep. Just now, he saw the crocodiles moving in the river, which meant that there were no dangerous beasts in the river. Otherwise, the crocodiles wouldn't have been so comfortable. Speaking of this, Fu Shi smiled helplessly. Why didn't we go over? In fact, when we saw such a huge change in the river, we thought about going over to take a look. After all, we could see some traces of life on the mountain over there. At that time, our chief thought that since there was a tribe on the other side, and we were so close, we should at least say hello and see if there was anyone on the other side who needed help. There were indeed traces of life on the other side. There were houses, pillars that acted as sundials, and other unnatural things at a glance. But at that time, the disaster had just passed and the earthquake had slowed down. Many tribes were seriously affected by the disaster. The people on the other side didn't appear, so they thought about going over to take a look. So, at that time, the drumming tribe sent a group of people over on the crocodiles. They didn't know if there were any dangerous creatures in the river. What the crocodiles weren't afraid of didn't mean they weren't afraid of. Riding on the crocodiles was the safest way. But then, as soon as we came ashore and shouted a few words, we were chased back. Fu Shi sighed. Chased back? Ao's voice suddenly rose. His eyebrows were almost raised, and his whole body released a clear, murderous aura. Someone's there? The other chief's first thought was similar to Ao's. Could it be that someone took advantage of the huge change in the river and went over first? Did they want to steal Yanjiao's territory? If it was somewhere else, it would be fine. But that place was another old haunt in the hearts of half of the Yanjiao people. How could they allow others to covet it? No matter who it was, if they couldn't chase them away, then they would beat them up. If they couldn't beat them away, then they would kill them. This was no longer an ordinary fight for territory. This was Yanjiao's reverse scale. Anyone who touched it would die. Seeing the sudden surge of murderous aura in the Yanjiao team, Fu Shi hurriedly explained, "No, we didn't see anyone over there. We were chased here by fearsome beasts." Fearsome beasts? Without the protection of the fire seed, it made sense that the fearsome beasts would go over there. The murderous aura in the Yanjiao team was slightly restrained, but they couldn't. Not even the fearsome beasts. Kill them all the same. What does that fearsome beast look like? Ao asked in a bad tone. The Yanjiao people touched the hilts of their swords, thinking about how to kill it. Fu Shi said, "We only saw one. It was a very big eagle, very fierce. It came out to patrol every day." Eagle? Ao was silent for a moment. Flying beasts were indeed not easy to hunt. "Look, it's coming again." A drumming tribe warrior next to Fu Shi pointed to the sky and shouted, "Hey, why is it flying over here?" Fu Shi exclaimed, "Wasn't that eagle only guarding the other side of the river? Why is it suddenly flying over? And it's so fast." Seeing this, the drumming tribe and Yanjiao people all picked up their swords, axes, and bows. "Wait, everyone, don't attack. It's an old friend." Xiao Xian hurriedly stopped them. "Old friend?" Ao didn't react at first, but then he thought of something. His eyes suddenly widened as he looked up at the sky. Caesar looked up at the sky and howled excitedly again. However, as the figure in the sky flew closer and closer, Caesar's howl changed midway, as if he was forcibly making a bend. There was a hint of doubt in his voice. It looked a lot bigger." Chapter 580. The figure in the sky was fast. It was just a small black dot a moment ago, but in the blink of an eye, it was already crossing the river. As the eagle flew closer and closer, the Yanjiao people's expressions became more and more strange, as if they didn't believe it. They glanced at Xiao Xian and saw Xiao Xian smiling at the sky. He didn't seem like he was going to change his mind. They looked at Ao again as if asking, "Chief, are we really not going to do anything?" Ao wasn't sure either. He thought Xiao Xian was talking about the giant mountain eagle called Cha-Cha, but now he realized that wasn't right. Cha-Cha wasn't that big. Moreover, if it was a Cha-Cha, why didn't the drumming tribe recognize it? However, despite his doubts, Ao didn't let them do anything. He just nodded at Xiao Xian with his chin, indicating that they should wait for Xiao Xian's decision. Caw, a loud eagle cry rang out in the sky. It was so loud that many people covered their ears. Caesar opened his mouth. He wanted to scream, but he wasn't sure. The huge figure quickly rushed towards them. When it landed, the wind caused by the flapping of its wings was so strong that it almost blew them away. If it weren't for the fact that the people standing here were all quite strong, they might not have been able to stand still. Ao raised his hand to block in front of his face. The wind was so strong that he almost closed his eyes. Boom! The giant eagle landed on the ground. Some of the stones on the ground were crushed, while others were sent flying. Stone chips and dirt flew up, hitting people's arms painfully. Xiao Xian laughed and walked over with open arms. He hugged his old friend whom he hadn't seen in a long time. Ao put down the hand that was blocking in front of him and looked over. The eagle standing in front of Xiao Xian was twice as tall as the one in his memory. Its body was also much bigger, and the patterns on its feathers were different. If it wasn't for the fact that the eagle bowed its head and seemed very familiar with Xiao Xian, he would have doubted his own judgment. "Long time no see, Cha-Cha." Xiao Xian patted its lowered head. He wasn't sure if it was because Cha-Cha had been to Eagle Mountain, but its body had changed a lot. There were even some sharp patterns on its feathers that resembled the outline of a mountain. In the past, when they came to the drumming tribe, Cha-Cha rarely stayed on the ground and had little contact with the people of the drumming tribe. Now that his size had changed so much and his fur pattern had changed, it was no wonder that no one in the drumming tribe could recognize him. Not only the drumming tribe, even the flaming horn tribe couldn't recognize him. Cha-Cha's excitement, if it wasn't for Xiao Xian's eyes. Seeing Caesar next to him, Cha-Cha raised his claws and walked over. Just as he was about to communicate with him, he saw Caesar's injured eye. Cha-Cha's houses. Cough. "Xian, this is Cha-Cha?" Ao walked over and asked. "Yes, that's it." Xiao Xian knew what Ao and the others were confused about, so he explained, "It must have changed a lot because it went to Eagle Mountain again." Ao nodded in understanding. Sure enough, giant mountain eagles had their own secret. When they were still on the other side of the river, Cha-Cha had also been to Eagle Mountain once. After that, he didn't know how he got there. He thought that Cha-Cha didn't go back with the Hui tribe because something happened. He didn't expect to see Cha-Cha here. Thinking of what Fu Shi said just now, Ao also smiled and praised, "This guy even knows to help our tribe look after our home." Ha! Xiao Xian laughed. From what he knew about Cha-Cha, Cha-Cha's wasn't because of the tribe. If this happened to Yanjiao's old haunt, it wouldn't have done anything and would have pretended not to see anything. To it, the place on the other side of the river was more intimate. The Yanjiao's old haunt was its, not its. To it, this was its old haunt. It grew up here, so its feelings for this place were deeper. It had completely incorporated this place into its territory. When it saw the drumming tribesmen trying to come ashore, it felt like its territory was being invaded. Even though it knew many of the drumming tribesmen, it couldn't calm its anger. Fortunately, it knew the drumming tribesmen and knew about their relationship with Yanjiao and Xiao Xian, so it only chased them away and didn't chase after them. Cha-Cha wasn't friendly to others. It had a bad temper, and might not even give face to the Yanjiao tribesmen, let alone the drumming tribesmen. No wonder Fu Shi said that the eagle on the other side of the river was fierce. After meeting Xiao Xian and Caesar, Cha-Cha went to look for Old Ku. When it was young, other than Xiao Xian, only Old Ku took care of it. So compared to the other Yanjiao tribesmen, it was more restrained around Old Ku. It was in a good mood today, so it started looking for familiar faces. Even though it didn't care much about the other Yanjiao tribesmen, it was still happy to see familiar faces in a familiar atmosphere. But why were there so many unfamiliar auras in this group? Its eagle eyes scanned the group and found that it didn't recognize half of the people in the group. Cha-Cha tilted its neck and looked at the 7 green-faced fanged beasts in the cage. It moved its claws. When it came to dangerous things, it always killed them first. Seeing Cha-Cha like this, Xiao Xian knew what it was thinking and quickly stopped it. Don't even think about killing them. The tribe needs them. Chief Elder, are we going over? Knowing that the creatures on the other side of the river weren't a threat, but their own people, Mai and the others were relieved. No one coveted their place, and no other beasts were there. They were so close, and they wanted to go home. After comforting Cha-Cha, who was throwing a tantrum again, Xiao Xian asked Fu Shi, "Can we swim across the river?" Fu Shi shook his head. "I don't know, we haven't been in the water before. When we went over, we had to rely on treasure fish." "I see." Xiao Xian thought for a moment. "Then we'll fly them over in batches." Now that Cha-Cha was back, and his body had grown so much bigger, he could send more people at once. "We can also ask the treasure fish to help you." Knowing that the other side was actually Yanjiao's territory, Fu Shi was relieved. He was very satisfied to be neighbors with Yanjiao. So, while asking the crocodiles of the drumming tribe to help, Xiao Xian also modified the carriage with rattan ropes for Cha-Cha to lift. There were people standing in the carriage, so it could be lifted over directly. There weren't many people to be transported at once, but they weren't in a hurry. They would first send some people over and then build a boat. There was obviously more wood on the other side of the river than here, and the damage wasn't serious. They could quickly make a simple raft. This made Xiao Xian very happy. It seemed like they could float wood in this river. Chapter 581. Xiao Xian was brought across the river by Cha-Cha. Although many houses on the mountain had collapsed, the cave that Xiao Xian lived in when he first came to this world was still there. From the outside, it still looked the same as before. When Xiao Xian went in, there were some bird droppings and traces of wild beasts. They probably came in after the tribe left, but when the world changed, they were scared away. Later, with Cha-Cha here, they didn't dare to come back. Without looking much, Xiao Xian and the other warriors who crossed the river first went to cut down trees nearby. Many of the trees on the surrounding mountains had fallen, but many more were still standing. Now they didn't have time to go further into the forest to cut down the thick ancient trees, so they could only use the trees on the nearby hills to deal with the emergency. It didn't take much time to make rafts, so Xiao Xian and the others quickly made some rafts. Xiao Xian calculated the width of the river. Although the river was still slowly rising, the distance between the two sides was only about 200 meters. At first, it sounded very far, but in reality, it wasn't. More than 20 long rafts were tied together to form a floating bridge on the water. They couldn't carry heavy objects, but they could definitely walk. They let the people waiting on the other side of the river line up and cross the river on the pontoon bridge. As for the few fearsome beasts, except for the alligator snapping turtle, the others were brought across by Cha-Cha in batches. Now that Cha-Cha was much bigger than them, he could hold them. The 7 green-faced fanged beasts were brought across the river in cages. They were very repulsed by Cha-Cha, and there was hostility between fearsome beasts. Fortunately, Xiao Xian, the one who enslaved them, suppressed them. Otherwise, they would have rushed out of the cages as soon as they were brought across the river. Simple wooden cages were simply unable to contain these 7 ferocious beasts. Watching the last group of Yanjiao players walk across the pontoon bridge, Xiao Xian turned to look at the wanderers. These wanderers had been following the Yanjiao team since they left the fearsome beast forest. They had not fallen behind. They had placed all their bets on the Yanjiao team. If they won, they would live. If they lost, they would die. Along the way, they had hesitated and felt lost. Some of them had left, and some of them had not been able to avoid the natural disaster. But in the end, nearly 300 people had survived and followed them. Xiao Xian had also discussed with the chief and the shaman on the way. The tribe did not reject the 300 wanderers. Moreover, now was the time of reconstruction, and they needed people. Although the wanderers did not have much strength, they still had some skills. Without skills, the wanderers would not have survived until now. Let's go. Xiao Xian looked at the hundreds of expectant eyes and tilted his head towards the pontoon bridge. The hundreds of anxious eyes suddenly lit up. Several people came over and excitedly thanked Xiao Xian. Then they called their relatives and friends to cross the pontoon bridge. Some crocodiles swam slowly on both sides of the pontoon bridge. Their cold eyes stared at the people on the pontoon bridge. Stepping on the pontoon bridge, some wanderers were still very nervous. But looking at the mountain in front of them, they calmed down a lot. As long as they crossed the bridge, they could start a new life. Although the Yanjiao people seemed to have a bad temper, at least they could tolerate them. They had just heard a few Yanjiao people talking about how much farmland they could cultivate and how many cows and horses they could raise. They could participate in all these. If they could exchange labor for food, they would not starve to death. Everything would be fine. The wanderers walking in front of them walked steadily and quickly. After the last wanderer had passed, Xiao Xian thanked Fu Shi and the others. "Thank you so much for today. When you have time, come and play on the other side." Fu Shi laughed out loud. He raised his hand and patted Xiao Xian's shoulder. "Okay." The other drumming tribe people were also in a good mood. It seemed pretty good to be neighbors with the Yanjiao people. Before, a Yanjiao warrior had told them that in the future, he would use animal meat and animal skin to exchange for water moonstones. If they could trade with the Yanjiao people, they would not have to look for the Pu tribe people anymore. Moreover, the Yanjiao people's clothes and things were much better than theirs. Many of them were things they had never seen before. A drumming tribe warrior looked enviously at the other side of the river. "In the future, I will save more water moonstones and exchange them with the Yanjiao people. They are more honest than the Pu tribe people." The others nodded in agreement. In fact, they had always known that the Pu tribe people were more treacherous, but they did not want to leave this place. They also had a lot of water moonstones in their hands. They did not want to be too troublesome, so they turned a blind eye. But now they changed their target. If there was a way, who would not want to live a better life? "What about this pontoon bridge?" Fu Shi asked Xiao Xian. "Let's leave it here for now," Xiao Xian said. "Okay, I'll tie it up again." Fu Shi went over and hammered down the already loose wooden stake, and tied it to the pontoon bridge again. After Xiao Xian said goodbye, he crossed the pontoon bridge. It was already late, and there was no time to build a new house. They could only make do for now. Fortunately, the weather was good these 2 days, and it was not cold at night. After experiencing this difficult journey, staying here for one night was actually very easy for many people. They were too lazy to move if there was a cave. Some children had already wrapped themselves in animal skins and slept directly on the ground. They had an impression of this place. It was like returning to the cradle, and they slept very deeply. The shaman called Xiao Xian over to discuss the settlement of the wanderers. In the end, they decided to give them a nearby hill to live in. There were no plants on the hill, but there were many holes like small houses. The warriors who went there to train in the past dug out stones. In the past, when the warriors were tired from training, they would rest there. Just right, now the wanderers lived there. Now the wanderers were exhausted and did not have the strength to build houses. The Yanjiao people were not much better. The warriors still had to assign tasks to clean up dangerous beasts. Everything could only depend on themselves. Having a cave to live in was already very good. After walking around, Xiao Xian went back to rest. The house he and Old Ku used to live in had already collapsed. Caesar was lying there. Old Ku was wrapped in animal skins and directly leaned on Caesar to sleep. Cha-Cha had flown away. Xiao Xian spread out a piece of animal skin and closed his eyes. It was rare for him to have a good night's sleep. The next day, after Xiao Xian woke up, he did not have time to eat breakfast. He ran to the river bank to look at the pontoon bridge above. The pontoon bridge sank a little. Xiao Xian went over and turned over the rafts near the shore. He saw some strange insects with long tentacles attached to them. The pontoon bridge sank because of them. They were dying, and their bodies were not as flexible as before. They could not stretch as freely as before. When the river disappeared, the living environment in the water might have changed. It was no longer conducive to their survival. Those that could leave had already left with the receding water. Those that could not leave could only wait for death. Perhaps in the near future there would be no insects that could eat wood in this river. Many river beasts that Xiao Xian and the others had seen in the river had also disappeared. Perhaps they had left with the river beasts. Perhaps they continued to live in a remote mountain forest in the upper reaches of the river. However, that was not what Xiao Xian needed to worry about. The changes that were unfavorable to the river beasts were good news for people. The Yanjiao team returned to this place again and started a new life. What was different from before was that they were no longer isolated from the world. When they wanted to go on a trade trip, if they wanted to use the animal skins they hunted to exchange for more things, if they wanted to communicate with more people, all they had to do was to walk across the pontoon bridge. Chapter 582. Early in the morning, the entire tribe was filled with the sounds of people yelling and banging. It was very lively. The place that had been quiet for 4 years was bustling again. Pieces of stone and thick wood were being transported to the mountain where the tribe was located. The people in charge of making pottery were also busy. Everything was good here except for the soil. It was not suitable for pottery. However, those who had experience in pottery were able to distinguish where the soil was most suitable for pottery. After being escorted out by the patrolling guards, they found 3 spots. If one didn't have good eyesight, they wouldn't be able to distinguish the difference in soil quality. At least, they hadn't found it when they were here before. They didn't know if it was because of the earthquake not long ago. Although the 3 spots were a little far from the mountain where the tribe was located, the Yanjiao people had plenty of strength. Moving things was a piece of cake. After the soil was transported back, some people, led by Xing, found that the soil was more suitable for making brick. The bricks they made were very good for building houses. Back then, Xing treated a simple pottery left behind by his ancestors as a treasure. Even now, that pottery was still kept by him. After he went to the old haunt, he came into contact with pottery and mastered the technique of making pottery. He had been addicted to it. Now, he was in charge of all pottery matters in the tribe. After the fire seed merged, Xing and some of the elders in the tribe were much healthier. It was as if they were younger by half. Xiao Xian could still hear Xing's proud laughter when he was building the house. Xing said that he would start making bricks and pottery immediately. However, they couldn't wait forever. There were so many people in the tribe. Who knew when they would have bricks? Therefore, most of the houses were made of wood and stone. It wouldn't be too late to change them after the bricks and tiles were made. The people in charge of farming had already started looking for suitable land. When the Yanjiao people left, they had dug a man-made lake. Now, the lake was still there, but the path connecting it to the river was broken. After all, the river was no longer there. The river bank had also changed a lot. There was a long bulge along the bank, like a giant python lying on the bank. In the future, the tribe would dig the path connecting the river and the lake again. The crops that couldn't withstand the drought would be planted around the lake. The ones that could withstand the drought and were suitable for the mountain environment would be planted in some places on the mountain. Duo Kong had already brought people to dig for stones. The core seed wrapped in white worm skin was also placed in a place. Now they had to choose a stone to throw over. The nearby area had already been cleaned up by the warriors. They cleaned up all the threatening beasts and plants. Those that could be eaten were dragged back to cook, and those that could not be eaten were burned. The outer walls that had been destroyed needed to be rebuilt. Ta and Gigu, the two team leaders, took those who were itching to hunt. The tribe did not have enough food now. Rebuilding the tribe was physical work, which consumed a lot of energy. They needed to hunt to survive. Zhengluo and the rest were not familiar with this place, so they followed in batches to learn the way. There were 5 hunting routes and 1 new exploration route, so they had to memorize them all. Xiao Xian's family had a giant antler deer brought back by Cha-Cha for breakfast today. Caesar had gone into the forest with the other ferocious beasts of the tribe to hunt for prey, and had not returned yet. They followed the hunting team, so Xiao Xian was not worried. After building the house, before Xiao Xian could rest, he saw Lang Jie dragging a net bag over. "I just caught them in the river. Take a look." Lang Jie untied the net bag and shook out the fish inside. When Xiao Xian came back from the shore in the morning, he saw Lang Jie casting the net. Xiao Xian asked Lang Jie to inform him when he caught any fish. Xiao Xian wanted to know what fish were still in the river. "There aren't many fish. There are drumming crocodiles in the river. I didn't dare to go to the center of the river, so I caught them from the shore," Lang Jie explained. Before the river disappeared, if they cast the net directly, it would be easily broken by the river beasts, so they made fish fences. Every time they caught a variety of strange creatures, but now that the river was gone, they could cast the net again, but the fish they caught were very monotonous. He cast the net and caught some fish, but he didn't catch anything else. He only saw 2 or 3 piranhas with sharp teeth. Their mental state was good, but unfortunately, the drumming tribe's crocodiles were all around. The piranhas couldn't be arrogant here at all. They would only become the crocodile's food. In the morning, Xiao Xian saw a crocodile bite several piranhas. "I think the river won't be so dangerous in the future," Lang Jie said. The drumming tribe was here, so the crocodiles would not leave. The river had risen a lot compared to yesterday. In the morning, the tribesmen added a few rafts to the pontoon bridge, and the position of the rafts tied to the shore had also risen. However, now the river was rising slower and slower, and it was almost flat. In the future, the river would remain the same, unless there was another great change to change it. By the way, when I was casting the net today, I met people from the drumming tribe who came from the other side to borrow wood. I had a chat with them. Lang Jie told Xiao Xian about what happened in the morning. Because the forest of the drumming tribe was badly damaged, many trees were broken and several mountains had disappeared. The existing trees could not provide enough wood for them to build houses. There were only some small trees, unless they went further away to cut them down. If there was no Yanjiao incident, perhaps they would have used some thin wood instead. But now there was a lot of wood here, and it was thick and strong enough. So the chief of the drumming tribe sent people over to borrow some wood. Most of their water moonstones were lost in the past disaster. Perhaps they were buried deep in the ground and could not be dug out. The small amount they had was traded for food by the traveling team. Now, if they wanted more wood, they could only borrow it. Ao and Zhengluo both knew about this. It was just wood, so they did not care. They just gave some to the drumming tribe, and the two sides became closer. From time to time, people from the drumming tribe would come over to chat with the Yanjiao people. Lang Jie got the news from the drumming tribe's people who came to carry the wood. "Do you remember the Luo tribe?" Lang Jie asked. Xiao Xian thought for a moment. "Yes, they're a tribe that's good at making fishing nets." The Luo tribe was close to the river and had a mountain. In the past, they often went to the Pu tribe to trade. Xiao Xian had traded fishing nets with them, and also exchanged a few sets of fish skin clothing. The Luo tribe's fishing nets were indeed very sturdy. The fishing nets they made could last longer in the river, and would not be broken by the river beasts that were good at gnawing on vines and wood. What happened to the Luo tribe? Xiao Xian asked. The Luo tribe is gone. Lang Ga's face was full of sympathy. I don't know if anyone escaped, but most of the people, along with their fire seed, are gone. The Luo tribe did not have the drumming tribe's crocodiles to warn them. They were also close to the river, so when the disaster happened, they could not escape in time and disappeared along with the entire river bank. The drumming tribe's people also felt sad when they talked about it. After all, a tribe they once knew had disappeared in the great change of the world. It's not just the Luo tribe. I heard from the drumming tribe's traveling team that a few small tribes near the river are also gone. Lang Jie sighed. Someone called him from afar. He answered, then Lang Jie put away the fishing net and left. Lang Jie ran back not long after he left. Xian, the people on the shore said someone is looking for you. Who is looking for me? Xiao Xian thought it was someone from the drumming tribe. He got up and walked over. I heard that person is called Yang Sui. Lang Jie shouted. Chapter 583. Yang Sui? The shaman of the Rain tribe? Why did he come here at this time? Xiao Xian was puzzled. He put down his work and went to the riverbank with Lang Ga. Did he come here alone? Xiao Xian asked. No, there were a few others. I didn't see the exact number, but they seemed to be in a hurry, Lang Jie said. In a hurry? Was it for the tribe or for other reasons? When Xiao Xian came to the riverbank, Yang Sui and the others had just been led ashore. Because of the disaster, the mountain had been raised a lot. The part near the riverbank was very steep. The warriors of the tribe had been repairing that part for the past 2 days, so there were no intact roads or stairs for them to climb up. Yang Sui and the others were covered with mud and stone marks. They looked very embarrassed and tired. It made sense. The distance from the Rain tribe to here was quite far. Just looking at this group of people, they were already exhausted. If it weren't for the flaming horn warriors who helped them up, perhaps half of them wouldn't have been able to climb up. Seeing Xiao Xian, Yang Sui forced a smile and then sat down on the ground. It was rare for him to be in such a state. Let me take a break first. Yang Sui wanted to lie down on the ground. He was only a shaman. Compared to the other warriors of the Rain tribe, he was much weaker. Xiao Xian asked someone to bring some food. Looking at these haggard and tired people, they must be hungry. They wouldn't be short of water. Manjiu, bring some food. How did you find this place? Xiao Xian asked. I was going to the fearsome beast mountain forest. I heard that Yanjiao was migrating again, so I asked around and followed you all the way here. Yang Sui turned his head to look at the busy Flaming Horn tribe. They didn't look dispirited at all. He thought the Flaming Horn tribe would be in a bad mood after being forced to move because of the disaster. He didn't expect it to be completely different from what he expected. Yang Sui didn't explain the specific purpose of his visit. Xiao Xian didn't continue to ask. This wasn't a good place to chat. Yang Sui must have something else to say. The 20 people of the Rain tribe all looked confused and nervous. They were even more anxious than the Yanjiao team during the migration. They just didn't say anything. Something must have happened. Was the Rain tribe seriously affected by the disaster? After a short rest, Xiao Xian asked someone to send a message to the shaman and chief, telling them that the Rain tribe had come. Then he took Yang Sui and the others to his house. The house had just been built, so it was a little crowded with more than 20 people. So Yang Sui asked the others to wait outside. Because the place where the tribe received outsiders had not yet been built, they could only wait here. However, these people of the Rain tribe didn't care about this. They just waited outside the house quietly. Old Ku cooked a pot of meat soup and shared it with them. Then he sat on a stone outside the house and chatted with these people who came from afar. Old Ku rarely saw people from other tribes. After all, he couldn't go out with the travel team because of his leg injury. In fact, he was very interested in many things about other tribes. When there was no one else in the house, Yang Sui's face suddenly collapsed. He scratched his head and said, "I'm afraid we have to migrate this time too." "Why?" Xiao Xian was surprised. Originally, he thought Yang Sui came here because of the disaster or the fire seed. But now it seemed that there was something else. In fact, the disaster in the past didn't have much impact on our tribe. At least we didn't suffer as many casualties as other tribes, Yang Sui said. The violent earthquake did cause houses to collapse and people were directly shaken from the ground. But in comparison, the Rain tribe didn't suffer much. When the earthquake was over, they could quickly resume their original life. As for the hot winter, the Rain tribe was short of water all year round. Now Yang Sui could pray for rain. Even if he only succeeded once in 10 times, it was enough for the Rain tribe to survive the disaster. What's more, they still had rain stones. The only thing they lacked the most was food. However, they stored grains and other things all year round, which could support them through that difficult period. Then why did you migrate the tribe? After a pause, Xiao Xian suddenly asked, "The desert?" Yang Sui smiled bitterly. Who else could it be? Yang Sui rubbed his face to make himself more energetic and continued, "I used to think that Rock Hill City would be more peaceful after driving away the other slave owners in the desert. But not long after the disaster, some slaves escaped from the desert and stole from our tribe. After we caught them, we interrogated them." Speaking of this, Yang Sui's expression was very strange, as if he couldn't believe it, but also as if he was worried about something. Those people were the slaves of the slave owners who were killed by Rock Hill City. They had been escaping in the desert, and some of them had gathered into small groups to survive. But after the disaster, most places in the desert were badly affected. Many people were directly buried in the sand because of the earthquake. This is not what I am most worried about. Taking a deep breath, Yang Sui looked at Xiao Xian. The 2 slaves we caught used to be close to the other side of the desert, close to the sea. However, he told me that the people who gathered on the other side of the sea were basically dead. They died under the waves and earthquake. Many places even disappeared directly. Not only that, when they left, they went to the coast to take a look. They said that there were many more places on the sea, and there seemed to be something on the sea. As he spoke, Yang Sui looked at Xiao Xian. Seeing that Xiao Xian was silent, Yang Sui continued, "Part of the desert disappeared, and some strange things appeared on the sea. Since then, Rock Hill City changed their target. They no longer cared about the people in other parts of the desert, and only dealt with those who were still alive near the coast. It was as if they wanted to clean up the people there and occupy the coast. Therefore, those who were lucky enough to survive near the coast all fled out of the desert. I remember that there were many people from Yanjiao who came out of the desert. You actually didn't come from the desert, but from the other side of the sea, right?" "That's right." Xiao Xian didn't deny it. Yang Sui's eyelids twitched. He couldn't help but stand up and ask impatiently, "What's on the other side of the sea? Why did the people of Rock Hill City change like that? Do you know?" What happened on the sea wasn't the main reason why Yang Sui was so worried. He just felt great unease from Rock Hill City's actions. If the disaster really closed the distance between the 2 sides, then what the slaves saw might really be what I know. Xiao Xian didn't expect something like this to happen. It happened only a year after they left. On the other side of the sea, there are tribes and slave masters. Many slave masters. But you asked if Rock Hill City had anything to do with them. From what I know, the Sher family has a grudge with them. I knew it. Yang Sui scratched his head with his fingers. The Rain tribe was close to the desert, so they knew more about slave owners. For thousands of years, there were several large boxes of records about slave owners. There was once an ancestor of the Rain tribe 1,000 years ago who mentioned that slave owners in the desert came from the other side of the sea. He always knew that there were people at the end of the desert on the other side of the sea. It was just that they were far away. In the past 1,000 years, he didn't hear of anyone coming from that side. Even when the desert changed and Rock Hill City became the ruler of the desert, they didn't think about that direction. It wasn't until Xiao Xian and the other Yanjiao people came out of the desert that Yang Sui was triggered. After that, Yang Sui flipped through many of his ancestors' records. The more he read, the more frightened he became. Then he thought about what Xiao Xian told him about the fire seed. Yang Sui couldn't stop worrying. Now, the desert changed again. Rock Hill City's actions made Yang Sui even more worried. He always felt that it wasn't safe to continue staying there. He even dreamed that the fire seed was extinguished. After a year, he lost weight. After the disaster, Yang Sui finally decided to bring some people to Xiao Xian to ask about the fire seed. At the same time, he also wanted to find out about the other side of the sea. He didn't just mention it casually. He really did have an idea. The slave masters in Rock Hill City were too dangerous. The Rain tribe couldn't fight against them. In the past, there were many slave masters and many forces in the desert. They could still fight among themselves. Now, the desert was Rock Hill City's territory. What if they wanted to expand in the future? Now, he heard from Xiao Xian that Rock Hill City had a grudge against the people on the other side of the sea. If they fought, would Rock Hill City target the tribes near the desert when they lacked slaves? As long as the fire seed was extinguished, there would be more people for them to enslave. Then the Rain tribe would be in even more danger. Yang Sui didn't care about the other tribes near the desert. He only cared about the future of the Rain tribe. So, what's your decision now? Xiao Xian looked at Yang Sui's changing face and asked. Yang Sui gritted his teeth. Move. We must move. Chapter 584. However, when it came to migration, Yang Sui hesitated. In fact, when Xiao Xian brought the Yanjiao people out of the desert last year, he already had the idea of migrating the tribe. It was not only about the fire seed, but also about the future of the tribe. However, migrating the tribe was a big deal for the whole tribe. He dared not make the decision on his own. Even though he had a high status in the Rain tribe, he could not make the decision on his own when it came to migration or the fire seed. He had been discussing with other senior members of the tribe until now. After a year's work, he had convinced many people. However, the decision to migrate the tribe had been made, but where to move to would lead to a new round of argument. Some people suggested moving to the central part of the continent, where there was plenty of water, good weather, and fertile soil. It was a good place to plant crops and people in the tribe could live a good life there. However, as soon as this suggestion was put forward, it was opposed by more people. He was well aware of the fighting capacity of the Rain tribe. All the traveling teams knew how competitive the central region was. Moreover, there were too many powerful warriors in the central region. Just the few big tribes alone could suppress them. How could it be easy to pick up the food among these powerful warriors? Besides, the situation in the central part of the continent had long been formed. It was hard for the Rain tribe to find a place to stay in the central part of the continent. Speaking of this, Yang Sui felt sad. In fact, a long time ago, the Rain tribe was also very strong. However, if he said this now, he would be ridiculed. Now the Rain tribe had been declining. Not to mention the big tribes in the central part of the continent, even some medium-sized tribes in the central part of the continent could beat them black and blue. Yang Sui had thought about whether he should go to the Yanjiao tribe. When they were discussing the migration location, the Yanjiao tribe had already destroyed Wanshe and dominated that area. Although it was close to the fearsome beast forest, the Yanjiao tribe was there. It should be fine, right? Besides, there were not many tribes there. They could find a place a little further away from the fearsome beast forest. This was also his purpose when he left the tribe to find the Yanjiao people in the fearsome beast forest. However, halfway there, he heard that the Yanjiao tribe had migrated again. He could only look for them all the way here. Thinking back to what he saw before he entered the house, the place where the Yanjiao tribe was now seemed to be more stable. "Are you going to settle down here?" Yang Sui asked tentatively. "Yes, we can't live in the fearsome beast forest anymore." Seeing Yang Sui rolling his eyes, Xiao Xian guessed something and asked, "What do you think?" "Ahem, a little bit." After thinking for a while, Yang Sui said, "What do you think if the Rain tribe comes here?" "Here?" Xiao Xian pointed at his feet and drew a line to indicate the riverbank. "No, no, no. I'm not talking about the river," Yang Sui hurriedly said. "When he came here, he heard from the drumming tribe that the Flaming Horn tribe had a forest behind them. It was a place as dangerous as the fearsome beast forest, maybe even more dangerous." Hearing this, Yang Sui's feet trembled. They didn't have much ambition and never thought of fighting for territory with ferocious beasts. Only ferocious tribes like Yanjiao would choose this kind of place. However, knowing the dangers behind the forest also had its benefit. That was, there would be less competition. Not many tribes dared to live here. Even if there was a war in the desert, it would definitely not reach here. "I heard that several tribes disappeared over there." Yang Sui pointed to the other side of the river, where the drumming tribe lived. "What do you mean?" Xiao Xian understood. Yang Sui wanted to find a place to live near the drumming tribe. In the past disaster, several small tribes near the river were destroyed. The Rain tribe wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to occupy a place. Ha! Yang Sui rubbed his hands. That was what he meant. Although the drumming tribe looked fierce, he could tell that the drumming tribe didn't have much ambition. They were easy to get along with after getting to know their tempers. They could even rely on the Flaming Horn's support. Don't think he didn't know anything. The Flaming Horn tribe had a lot of things in their hands. They weren't interested in a small tribe like theirs. Plus, the Flaming Horn fire seed was gone. If they moved to this area, they wouldn't have to worry about being suppressed by the fire seed. Yang Sui knew a lot of things. He could even connect the notes left by his ancestors to the current situation in the desert. After thinking about it, he felt that it was safest to rely on Yanjiao. The tribes in the central region were not suitable. There were too many tribes relying on them. If the Rain tribe went there, those tribes wouldn't care. But Yanjiao was different. They knew each other. "We've known each other for a long time." Ha! Yang Sui laughed. Xiao Xian spread his hands. "That's not Yanjiao's territory. You can make your own decisions. But I have to remind you that even if we don't have any conflicts, I can't guarantee what will happen if the Rain tribe makes trouble." "Hey, I know. Of course, I understand." After chatting with Xiao Xian for a while, Yang Sui went to visit the two shamans and the chief of Yanjiao. Then he left with more than 20 people of the Rain tribe. He planned to talk to the people of the drumming tribe and make a final decision. The people of the drumming tribe were still talking about the Luo tribe and other tribes that didn't survive the disaster. While they were sighing, they heard that the Rain tribe intended to move here. They didn't care much about the Rain tribe. As long as they weren't greedy and cruel people, the people of the drumming tribe didn't care. Knowing that the water moon stones came from the drumming tribe, the Rain tribe's people's eyes lit up. They didn't want to rob them, but they felt that it would be easier and more cost-effective to trade with them, just like how they could exchange for shells more easily in the past. They didn't expect that moving here would bring them such benefits. Without shells, they still had water moonstones. Do the people of the drumming tribe eat grains? We can plant it, all of us in the Rain tribe can plant it. What? We don't eat grains, but we like meat? We can raise animals, cattle, sheep, horses and so on. What kind do you like to eat? We'll sell them to you at a cheaper price. Pottery? Linen? We can do that too. We can do anything. We can learn even if we don't know how to. So, when Xiao Xian was discussing with the shamans and chiefs, he heard from the warriors who came back from the river bank that the people of the drumming tribe and the rain tribe had become good friends. It seems that the rain tribe is likely to move here, Xiao Xian said. The shaman thought of something and smiled. In fact, the rain tribe has a long history. They may not be worse than the big tribes in the central region today. But I don't know how they became like this. They know far more things than we know. It's just that the Rain tribe's living place limited them. The people of the Rain tribe said that they could farm, raise animals and make pottery. They weren't bragging. The ancestors of the Rain tribe did master a lot of skills. But later, the people of the Rain tribe gradually gave up those skills because they could get a lot of good things without those skills. But now, in order to survive, they might pick up those skills again. Chapter 585. After destruction came new life. There used to be no river here, but 1,000 years ago the earth and sky changed. The earth suddenly split open and separated the flaming horn ancestors from the other side of the river, forming a huge river that blocked their way back. Now the earth changed again. The big river turned into a small river and the split land closed. On both sides of the river, one side fell down and the other rose up. The flaming horn tribe's side was uprooted. The mountain they used to live on was now much higher. When they looked up, they could see the white peak of the mountain surrounded by water vapor. There was a layer of white snow there. The place where the fire pond used to be was now buried under the white snow. The one that fell down was the drumming tribe's side of the river. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many tribes near the river that were destroyed. No matter how strong the fire seed was, it could keep burning underground. But without people, the fire seed was like a fire source that had burned to the end but had no more firewood. It would disappear quickly and then be destroyed in the depths of the earth. When Yang Sui went to survey the nearby terrain to determine the destination, he felt that the fire seed nearby had been extinguished. The fire seed was not strong, so it was extinguished quickly. The people of the Luo tribe were all buried deep in the earth. If the Rain tribe moved here, there would be no conflict between the fire seeds. In the past, tribes like the Luo tribe liked to be close to the river. But the Rain tribe was different. They planned to plant crops, so they would find a place with more flat land, a little farther from the river. Plus, with the Luo tribe's example, they didn't have the courage to be so close to the river. However, the Rain tribe could divide more land into their own territory. After all, they still needed water to irrigate their crop. After confirming the location, Yang Sui sent 2 bags of shells to the people of the drumming tribe, asking them to help guard the land and prevent other tribes from robbing it. The people of the drumming tribe had a good impression of the Rain tribe. To some extent, they all liked water and got along well with each other. The people of the Rain tribe worshipped water. Their belief in rain was far beyond the imagination of the Yanjiao people. Otherwise, Yang Sui, who could pray for rain, wouldn't have such a high status in the Rain tribe. After confirming the location, Yang Sui hurriedly left with his people. They had to move their tribe here as soon as possible and prepare for winter. Although there was still a long time before winter, the migration would still take some time. Since there were more things to prepare, they had to hurry. The migration of the Rain tribe was much more troublesome than the migration of the Yanjiao tribe. The Yanjiao tribe had already merged their fire seed, so they didn't need to bring their fire seed with them. However, as a tribe that still had their fire seed, the Rain tribe had to be more careful. It was very risky to bring a fire seed on the road. This was also why many tribes were unwilling to move once they had settled down. It was too troublesome and risky. When Yanjiao returned to the old land from the other side of the river, they also brought the incomplete fire seed with them. That kind of nervous tension was indeed uncomfortable. Yang Sui also wanted to try to integrate the fire seed before moving the tribe. Unfortunately, The Rain tribe might not be able to discuss this matter immediately. After all, many years had passed, and the idea of integrating the fire seed was deeply ingrained. Many people couldn't accept it at the moment. On the way back, Yang Sui sighed. There was no other way. They had to solve the migration problem first, then deal with the people in the tribe later. In the Yanjiao tribe, the buildings were rebuilt one by one. They were even more magnificent than before. Many of them were drawn by Xiao Xian and finalized after discussing with the craftsmen who were good at building houses. For example, the meeting hall on the mountain and the 50-meter-tall watchtowers were built on the mountainside and the river bank at the foot of the mountain. Things were different now. Before the river disappeared, they didn't need to guard against the other side of the river. They only needed to keep an eye on the river. But now they had to guard against the other side of the river. Although the Drumming tribe and the Rain tribe weren't hostile to Yanjiao, it was better to be cautious. Just because they weren't hostile, it didn't mean others weren't hostile. They hadn't started planting the 1,000-grain gold yet. Now wasn't the best time to plant it. The 1,000-grain gold was too precious and the tribesmen didn't want to waste it. They could only cultivate the land first and plant it next year. In the other fields, crops suitable for this season had already been planted. The cabbages were harvested when they were in the fearsome beast forest. They were temporarily with the shamans. There were still some cabbages left on the ox cart. They were planted first. The veins of the sky couldn't be planted on the mountain. The mountain where Yanjiao lived wasn't suitable for planting. So, they planted them in another area, guarded by soldiers every day. The normal farmland and the special farmland were separated. The normal farmland was more common on the mainland. There were also wanderers working there. The special farmland was mostly planted with seeds from the Jeju. The veins of the sky were also planted in the special farmland. In the future, the 1,000-grain gold would be planted there too. The special farmland was taken care of by Xiao Xian, the shamaness, and the chief. The soldiers guarding it were also decided by them. No one else could get close without permission. Life in the Yanjiao tribe was back on track. After the hunting team was formed, they began to hunt regularly. After 4 years, many Yanjiao people were very excited to return to this place again. Even the fearsome beasts were more active. Because of the great changes in the world and the chaos in the forest, the territories of the beasts they were familiar with had changed. They needed to calculate and map again. But that wasn't a problem. After satisfying the Yanjiao's needs, they would trade some with the Drumming tribe. However, the Drumming tribe was now poor. They didn't have any water moonstones, so they could only write IOUs. This didn't matter. They weren't worried about the Drumming tribe reneging on their debt. On this day, after Xiao Xian fed the green-faced fanged beast some blood, he went to the casting room. When he came out, he heard from the watchtower that the Rain tribe had arrived. According to the patrolling warriors who were watching over there, the Rain tribe was not in a good state after a long migration. There were many injured people in the tribe, and even those who were not injured were dispirited, looking haggard and haggard. However, when they arrived, the entire Rain tribe burst into cheers. They were going to welcome a new life here. After taking this step, there was no turning back. Instead of reminiscing about the past, it was better to fight for the future. Not long after Xiao Xian received the news, Yang Sui brought people over to borrow food. They hadn't seen each other for a while. Yang Sui looked darker and thinner. When he came over, he was carried on someone's back. This migration was really not easy. As a shaman, he had to protect the fire seed and build a fire pit when they arrived at the destination. The journey was difficult. They used to be rich, but now they had no money in their pockets. It was difficult to even take out a piece of shell. There were many injured and hungry people in the tribe. Now they could only borrow from Yanjiao. 1 year. Don't worry, we can pay it back by this time next year. Maybe it won't take a year, maybe half a year. Although Yang Sui was not in good condition, his eyes were bright. He was still confident about the future. Therefore, not long after Yanjiao settled here, he began to be a creditor. He had two debts, one from the drumming tribe and the other from the rain tribe. Chapter 586. After eating, Yang Sui ordered his men to bring the food he borrowed from Yanjiao back to the tribe. He would stay in Yanjiao for the time being. After a few pieces of meat and a bowl of soup, the half-dead Yang Sui was full of energy again. Knowing what Xiao Xian cared about, Yang Sui didn't keep him in suspense. When we left, the situation in the desert was getting worse. Yang Sui paused slightly when he said there. After all, to him, there was the place where the Rain tribe had lived for thousands of years. This was also the reason why many people objected when Yang Sui first proposed to move the tribe. Tribesmen cared a lot about their roots. To them, that place was their homeland, their roots, the place where their ancestors lived. Even if it was barren and desolate, bordered by the desert, they were still willing to stay there. If it weren't for the great changes in the world and the threat of the slave masters, even if Yang Sui proposed to move the tribe, there would still be strong opposition. As for the bad situation, Yang Sui mentioned, that was only for the wandering slaves and slave masters, as well as the tribes living in the surrounding area. It wasn't the same for the people of Rock Hill City. On the other hand, it also meant that the ruler of the desert, Rock Hill City, was still on the move. Do you know that half of the desert is now left? Yang Sui exclaimed. Even though Xiao Xian was prepared, he couldn't help but be shocked when he heard the news. Such a large desert was directly reduced by half in the past earthquake. It would be strange if it didn't cause a commotion. Xiao Xian couldn't help but worry about his sleeping slave. He didn't know how that guy was doing now. Xiao Xian could feel that Sapphire was still alive, but he couldn't confirm its current situation. Yang Sui glanced at Xiao Xian's expression and asked, "Do you want to go to the desert to take a look?" "That's an idea. I advise you not to go now. Now that the desert has shrunk by half, it's easier for Rock Hill City to control the desert. Plus, they're still cleaning up the desert. You'll be attacked if you go." Even if the desert had shrunk by half, it was still huge for humans. But Yang Sui's words were true. If what Yang Sui had heard from the slaves who escaped from the desert was true, then the people of Rock Hill City might have predicted this a long time ago. Considering the events of the past few years and the fact that the Rock Hill City team had entered the fearsome beast forest to search for the green-faced fanged beast and then left in a hurry, Xiao Xian didn't believe that there was nothing wrong. But if Rock Hill City had already anticipated this and were waiting to take revenge for 1,000 years ago, did they really have that many people? Or were there really that many slaves who could fight against the slave masters on the other side? If they didn't have enough manpower, they would definitely attack the tribes, but Rock Hill City didn't do that. That meant that they had sufficient manpower and were well prepared. Where did this person come from? This was something that Xiao Xian had no way of knowing. However, Xiao Xian had a feeling that Rock Hill City had a trump card up their sleeve. Although Xiao Xian really wanted to go to the desert to investigate, now was not a good time. First, Rock Hill City was on the move and would treat anyone who entered the desert as an enemy. Second, Yanjiao had just stabilized and many things were not done yet. The Rain tribe had also moved to the nearby area, and there might be other tribes on the move as well. His own matters were not settled yet, and he didn't have time to care about others. Xiao Xian couldn't just leave. After thinking about it, Xiao Xian also thought it through. Curiosity and worry were useless now. The most important thing was to develop themselves. As long as the tribe was strong, everything would be fine. After Yang Sui left, Xiao Xian went out to the mountains to look for Zheng Luo. He decided to go hunting with Zheng Luo and the others in a few days. As soon as he went out, Xiao Xian bumped into Old Ku, who had just returned from the cave at the foot of the mountain. Stone tools weren't what the tribe lacked the most now. After they had pottery and metal tools, stone tools were gradually being replaced. Old Ku also made some stone tools, but he was just itching to play with them. He was now teaching children at the foot of the mountain. Some children who had lost their parents and guardians were still arranged to live in the Crouching Ox Cave. Now that the tribe was starting to develop, they were no longer in a state of muddling through. The education of young children was also focused on. Before he left, Xiao Xian had organized similar teaching activities. Later on, he went to the old haunt and built a place similar to a school. Not long ago, Xiao Xian discussed with the shaman and the chief and started a more detailed education. There were also 3 brick houses built on the mountainside. There was also the empty training ground that was originally used for training, forming a simple school. However, for the orphans living in the Crouching Ox Cave, other than the school on the mountainside, there were also some relatively free people from the tribe who would teach them from time to time. Old Ku was one of them. There was less demand for stone tools in the tribe, but that didn't mean they didn't need this skill. When they were in the mountains, they still had to rely on stone tools for emergencies. So when Old Ku was free, he would go to the Crouching Ox Cave to teach the children how to make stone tools. He didn't expect the kids to be interested. As long as someone wanted to learn, Old Ku would happily continue to teach. Other than stone tools, he also set traps. Hunting skills like this were necessary for the Yanjiao people who hunted for a living. Even if they couldn't master it, it was always good to know more. Although the tribe had developed well and had the resources to build more houses, the children who had lost their relatives continued to live in the Crouching Ox Cave out of nostalgia. It was a special place where their ancestors had stayed before. Old Ku often encouraged the children by saying, "Your elder Xiao Xian came out from this cave." The Crouching Ox Cave now wasn't the same as the one Xiao Xian used to live in. If it was said that the cave used to be rough, now it was well renovated. When it was dark, there were water moonstones to light up the place. They didn't have to worry about food and water. Naturally, there would be people to provide them. The food was also much better than what Xiao Xian used to have. Some small rooms that used to store junk were also cleaned up. Except for the stone room with the mural, the other rooms were made into small rooms, just like dormitories. The bunk beds were made by Xiao Xian and the carpenters. They weren't covered with the withered grass that Xiao Xian and the others used to use, but animal skin or linen. Of course, other than the most basic necessities, if the children wanted to get more things, they still had to rely on themselves. It was impossible to get something for nothing, and the tribe didn't want to raise people like that. When Xiao Xian went there yesterday, the children were still gathered inside the cave. In the spacious open space near the entrance of the cave, they were holding branches and learning how to write and count on the sand table. As for the crooked words written on the walls with years of history, they were left behind by the seniors who used to live there. They were inspirational words left behind by the seniors who used to live there. Everything was developing in a good direction. Xiao Xian stood on the mountainside and looked into the distance. When he stood here before, he could only see the small houses scattered at the foot of the mountain and the vast river in the distance. Now, the scenery was different. Chapter 587. On the 3rd day of the Rain Tribe's arrival, Xiao Xian followed the hunting team to hunt. Now, the advance group did not take action for the time being. The disaster in the past had caused many changes in the forest. In addition, they had been away for 4 years, so they had to familiarize themselves with the most basic hunting route. This time, Xiao Xian did not follow the hunting route he was familiar with. Instead, he followed the person who opened up the 6th hunting route. Compared to the other 5 hunting routes, the 6th one took the shortest time to open up, and the route was also the shortest. When this hunting route was opened, Xiao Xian had left the tribe to go to the other side of the river. Before this hunting route was fully opened up, the tribe had already moved. A satisfactory hunting route was not something that could be opened up overnight. Even 1 or 2 years would not be enough. Now, Xiao Xian and the other warriors of the tribe continued to open up this hunting route. Now that there were more people in the tribe, even if they split into 2 groups, there were more people on each hunting route than before. Duo Kong and the others who came from the other side of the river were full of curiosity about this place. This place was even stranger than some places in the fearsome beast forest. Whoosh! The sound of an arrow piercing through the air was heard. There was a muffled sound of flesh being pierced, and the sound of blood splashing at high speed on the leaf. Roar! The angry roar of the beast made the surrounding leaves tremble. However, if one was familiar with the beasts in the forest, they would be able to tell that this roar was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. It sounded angry, but if one listened carefully, they would be able to tell that it was timid. The huge figure that was running forward could not be seen among the even larger towering ancient trees, but its position could be determined by the movements of the branches. The prey was running in a panic, and the branches were constantly breaking and making cracking sounds as it ran. More than 10 figures followed the giant beast closely, shuttling between the trees nimbly and quickly. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several more spears were thrown out like cannonballs, heading straight for the target. Although the fleeing figure in front of it was large, its speed was not slow. Even though it was panicking now, it was still familiar with this place after all. It instinctively ran towards a place full of bushes in front of it. Those shrubs were as tall as a person, and their branches were dense but very thin. Every thin branch had many thin thorns. If one stood at a high place and looked at it from afar, it looked like a large brush stuck to the ground, and could directly scrape off a person's flesh bit by bit. However, the thorny shrubs were nothing to the behemoths, who had a layer of tough skin and sturdy hooves. They could still run away by stepping on them. However, this was not the case for humans. If it ran to that area, it would be a real headache for the hunting team. The people chasing after it avoided the broken branches. No matter how strong they would not be able to withstand the blow from the giant beast. Seeing that the giant beast was getting closer and closer to the bush area, the hunters threw spears and shot arrows one after another. The giant beast was already injured in many places, and when it ran, it carried a bloody wind. Spears stabbed into the giant beast's body, and were carried along as it ran. Just as the giant beast was about to step into the bush area, a few figures suddenly jumped up from both sides. Under the support of the totem power, the tyrannical strength became more and more unyielding. The person who leaped up held his weapon tightly and waved his arm to chop down. The strong wind that was stirred up made a whoosh sound. The nearby branches seemed to be pushed by a fierce wind and were blown to the other side. Puff, puff, puff. The sharp blade cut through the thick tough hide, and when it left, the tip of the blade flew out with a line of blood. The giant beast let out an unwilling howl, and finally fell to the ground with a thud due to its heavy injuries. The people who came next gave it another stab, and when the giant beast was completely dead, they approached it. Xiao Xian took out the water bottle hanging on his waist with the hand that was not holding the sword. There was only a little water left in the bottle. He stabbed the sword into the ground, and picked a leaf that was about 4 palms size. He washed it with the remaining water in the bottle, and then rolled the leaf into a funnel, and put it on the bleeding spot on the giant beast's neck. The bright and thick blood flowed along the rolled leaf into the bottle. The blood of a fearsome beast could be preserved for a longer time than the blood of other beasts. If some grass juice was added to prevent the blood from coagulating, it could be preserved for a longer time. When hunting in the forest, if it was not convenient to roast meat, they would use the blood of fearsome beasts to temporarily replenish their strength. After drinking a mouthful of beast blood, the smell of blood filled his nose. If it was someone who did not like the smell of blood, they would probably vomit, but Xiao Xian was already used to the smell. Different fearsome beasts had different tastes. Xiao Xian could now not only tolerate the smell of beast blood, but he could also laugh and talk with the other warriors about which type of beast blood tasted better, just like a group of wine lovers talking about which type of wine suited their taste. Wiping the blood from his mouth, Xiao Xian looked at the sky. Now that the sun was already setting, they had to deal with this prey as soon as possible and bring it back to the stronghold. The people who were chasing them had already caught up. Seeing that Xiao Xian and the others had already killed the fearsome beast, they did not say much. While there was still blood, they quickly took out their bottles to collect the beast blood. After carrying the beast back to the stronghold, Xiao Xian took out a roll of animal skin, summarized what he had seen in the past 2 days, and recorded it on the roll. This was a simple map, and it was the 6th hunting route. Now, every time they opened up a new section, there would be an additional section on the map. In addition to hunting fearsome beasts, Xiao Xian had another purpose. In the cave of the stronghold, other than the warriors who were resting, there were also bursts of whistling sounds. It sounded like the wind was blowing, and from time to time, there was also the sound of metal clashing. Xiao Xian brought out a green-faced fanged beast, the one with broken fangs. The tribe did not have much food and grain for them, but they needed the green-faced fanged beast to grow normally. Xiao Xian wanted to bring one out during the hunt and let it find food on its own. After being enslaved, the green-faced fanged beasts were not absolutely obedient, but at least they were obedient most of the time. Just in case, they still had to be bound. Vine ropes could not bind them tightly, so Xiao Xian specially made a bronze chain. The green-faced fanged beasts could easily break the bones of many beasts, and even stone, but it could not break the new bronze chain made with their own blood. After tying them with a chain, if Xiao Xian had free time during the hunt, and if he was sure that there were no dangerous fearsome beasts nearby, he would lead them out and let them find food on their own. Fortunately, Xiao Xian could keep up with the green-faced fanged beast's speed. Otherwise, if it was someone else, they would not be able to handle it. If that happened, it would not be a human leading the beast, but a beast leading a human. It had been 8 days since they entered the forest. Xiao Xian really did find a few types of food that the green-faced fanged beasts could barely eat. He recorded them one by one and brought some back. If the forest could provide food for the green-faced fanged beasts, they would not have to continue eating the cabbage in the field. In the future, they could just let the hunters bring it back. Xiao Xian, do you think the weather will be hot or cold this winter? Duo Kong asked. I don't know. We should be able to tell in a few days. Xiao Xian looked out of the cave. Time passed really quickly. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. Although he did not know if this winter would be as strange as the previous 2 years, Xiao Xian was not worried. Even if there were any abnormalities, it would not be a big deal. As they were talking, the person in charge of guarding outside came over. Boss, Elder, come out and see. There are so many birds in the sky. Chapter 588. Xiao Xian kept the animal skin scroll in his hand and hurried out of the cave. Why would there be a flock of birds at this time? They didn't hear any big movements in the forest, so it was impossible to startle the birds. Moreover, if it was just a small flock of birds, the people guarding outside wouldn't be so shocked. Even though Xiao Xian knew that there must be a large flock of birds in the sky, when he really walked out of the cave and looked at the sky, he realized that he had underestimated it. The dense flock of birds in the sky was like a dark cloud that suddenly appeared, covering most of the afterglow of the setting sun, casting only a shadow. Why are there so many birds? Where did they come from? Even the people who first participated in the development of this hunting route had never encountered such a thing. In the past, when we developed this hunting route, we didn't see anything like this. They were the people who knew the best about this hunting route, but this was the first time they saw such a scene. What are those birds? I can't see clearly, they're flying too high. They don't look small, and they're flying very fast. Even if they're big and fly fast, with such a large number of birds, are they migrating? The people looking at the sky casually expressed their opinions, but Xiao Xian's heart skipped a beat. According to the time in the tribe, at this time, it was indeed autumn in many places. In cold places, the temperature dropped early. Could it be that they were migrating to warmer places? But if that was the case, they had never been seen here before, so why did they suddenly appear now? They didn't know where the flock of birds in the sky came from, and where they were going, so the hunting team still had to continue. Everyone, be careful, Duo Kong said to the others with a stern face, then turned and strode into the cave. When Xiao Xian also walked into the cave, Duo Kong hurried over. At this time, he looked nervous, completely different from the sternness he had when he was warning the others outside the cave. Duo Kong lowered his voice, probably because he was too excited, and his voice was trembling at the beginning. Xiao Xian, why do you think those birds in the sky suddenly flew up? Could it be? Could it be? Is there something wrong? Xiao Xian paused for a moment, then understood. Duo Kong was worried about another catastrophe. It was no wonder that Duo Kong was so nervous and frightened. After all, he had experienced the previous disaster and was extremely paranoid. Whenever he saw a similar scene, he would think in that direction. When he left the old haunt, there were also flocks of birds coming out of the ferocious beast mountain forest when the world changed. Xiao Xian pondered for a moment. He didn't have the same feeling of fear and uneasiness that he had during the cataclysm. He looked at the green-faced fang beast that was sleeping soundly in the cave and said, "I don't think so." Duo Kong didn't dare to breathe. He continued to stare at Xiao Xian. Why don't you tie another knot? What he meant was that he wanted Xiao Xian to perform a knot divination. Otherwise, he would feel uneasy. That's fine too. Today's hunt had already ended, so it wouldn't matter if he spent some energy on divination. Xiao Xian was about to look for a straw rope when Duo Kong handed it over. Xiao Xian looked at the straw rope and then looked at Duo Kong. This person usually didn't use such a thin straw rope. Cough, I just made a little too much when I was making the straw rope. I kept it for later use, said Duo Kong. He didn't use such a thin straw rope himself, but ever since he saw Xiao Xian's ability in knot divination, he developed a habit of making straw ropes that were thin and easy to tie. If Xiao Xian didn't have any straw rope, he could provide some. Not only Duo Kong, but Jingluo, Ta, and Gigu all did the same thing in the tribe. They just didn't encounter a situation where Xiao Xian had to perform a divination. Xiao Xian adjusted his breathing and then picked up the straw rope. He closed his eyes and began the divination. He only wanted to know about the birds in the sky. Where did they come from and where did they go? After a while, Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked at the completed knot in his hand. After reading the conclusion, he frowned. What happened? Duo Kong was so nervous that his teeth were chattering. He didn't want to hear the terrible news from Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian shook his head. It's not a disaster. Duo Kong let out a long sigh. But... Duo Kong held his breath and glared at Xiao Xian. It's a little strange, said Xiao Xian. What's strange? Duo Kong couldn't calm down. Xiao Xian pointed in a direction. The divination didn't give us accurate information, but we know that the birds came from that direction. That direction? Duo Kong thought carefully about the map he had seen. In the fearsome beast mountain forest, other than the 6 hunting routes, there were also some places that were not often visited. Duo Kong was thinking about the places in that direction on the map. However, this forest was very big. Even though the Yanjiao tribe had lived here for almost 1,000 years, the places they had visited were very limited. The map they had drawn was just the tip of the iceberg. Duo Kong couldn't deduce anything with just the direction. Xiao Xian couldn't figure out what was in that direction either, so he put it aside for the time being. What surprised Xiao Xian and the others was that in the following period of time, they saw flocks of birds flying in the sky one after another. However, the flocks were different every time, and there were many different types of birds. Moreover, these flocks of birds only flew in that direction. Even when Xiao Xian and the others returned to the tribe from the hunting ground, they didn't see the flocks of birds fly back. Seeing such a situation, everyone had a question in their heart: what happened? When the other hunting teams from the other 5 hunting routes met up with them and communicated with them, the other hunting teams had also seen the same flocks of birds, but at different times. After all, there was still some distance between the hunting routes. This question made the Yanjiao tribe, which had just settled down, depressed again. The 2 shamans were also depressed. They didn't feel any danger, nor did they see any signs of change in the weather. So why was this happening? It was said that the beasts in the forest and the birds in the sky could react to danger in advance. It was because of this that the people of Yanjiao were worried. Why was this happening? The atmosphere in the tribe was tense again. Some of the warriors even began to make stone tools. Metal tools were limited, so they had to make more stone tools as backup. The blacksmiths in the forge were under more pressure, and they worked overtime every day. Whether it was a natural disaster or war, they had to be prepared. In the last few days, they still saw flocks of birds flying in the sky from time to time. Even if they weren't directly above Yanjiao, the people standing on the watchtowers or near the top of the mountain could still see the flocks of birds flying in the sky. After observing, Xiao Xian found that the birds in the sky started from the large, fast, strong, and ferocious birds in the beginning. Gradually, they became smaller, weaker, and more ferocious birds. Until one day, when Xiao Xian was standing on the watchtower on the mountainside, he suddenly saw a green figure flying over. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.